Good afternoon. Welcome to DCA's Delta Stakeholder Engagement Committee. It's being held via teleconference Ring Central on Wednesday, August 26, 2020. I am Chair Sarah Palmer, and thank you for joining us. And we appreciate your taking time to participate in this process, providing your thoughts on ways we can provide a community focus on the engineering aspects of a proposed conveyance project. For the record, this meeting is being conducted via Ring Central and teleconference to ensure we are adhering to requirements related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The purpose of the SEC is to create a forum for the Delta stakeholders to provide input and feedback on technical and engineering issues related to the DCA's current activities. The SEC is a formal advisory body to the DCA Board of Directors. It is subject to the public transparency laws applicable to local public agencies like the Brown Act and Public Records Act. So in terms of our practices for virtual meetings, for public comment, as noted on the agenda, non-SEC members, let me see. Oh, wait a minute. Let us first get to roll call. I've got to stick to the agenda. Let's do roll call first, please.
Sure. Chair Palmer?
Here.
Vice Chair Keegan?
Here.
Committee Member Swenson?
Yes. Here.
Committee Member Whaley?
Wendy?
Sorry. Committee Member Berrigan Priya? Committee Member Giacomo? Committee Member Glosky?
Here.
Committee Member Shia? Committee Member Cosio?
Here.
Committee Member Gonzalez-Potter?
Here.
Committee Member Cox?
Here.
Committee Member Tarango?
Present.
Committee Member Wallace?
Here.
Committee Member Mann? Committee Member Liebig? I think I said her. Yeah. Committee Member Lytle?
Here.
Committee Member Moran?
Here.
Committee Member Chayaba?
Here.
Committee Member Robertson?
Here.
Committee Member Merlo? Committee Member Worth?
Here.
Committee Member Hardesty. And then let me just go over a few names that I didn't hear a response to. Committee Member Whaley?
She might be a few minutes late. She's running back. She's running late from another meeting.
Okay.
And CC was having trouble logging in. Just a couple minutes ago, I sent her the login info again, and she might call in.
Okay.
But CC, if you're here, let us know.
And then Barbara Berrigan Priya?
Also told us she'll be running a few minutes late because of a family emergency.
Alrighty. And then let's see, Committee Member Merlo and Committee Member Hardesty. Alrighty, well, we have a quorum.
Okay, excellent. Then I'm going to get back to some of the practices for the virtual meeting. In terms of public comment, as noted on the agenda, non-SEC members of the public will be muted until they are called to speak during the public comment period. Okay, this period will occur after the conclusion of the staff presentations and the SEC questions and comments for all agenda items. So the SEC members will come first. Okay, if you wish to provide remote telephonic public comment on agenda items, please complete the online public comment form. And there is a link, it's HTTPS, and it's / tinyurl.com and then / DCA public comment -SEC. So that DCA public comment is all one word. And this should be done by 4 p.m. This link can also be found on the dcdca.org website. So if you just Google DCA dcdca.org. And once we get to that point in the meeting, our facilitator, Valerie Martinez, will call out to each person to speak, and the line will be opened and the speaker will provide comments. Also, if I could mention in terms of overall courtesy to all the members, if you are not speaking, please mute yourselves. Next, the public may also provide written public comment by email to publiccomment@dcdca.org. All written comments received prior to the conclusion of the meeting will be included in the written record for the meeting, but will not be read during the meeting. We will follow the same process for public comment on non-agendized items. Okay, and then we've got the SEC comments and question portion of our meeting. SEC members will see the raise hand function within the Ring Central, and Ms. Martinez will call out the name of the SEC member to make a comment or ask a question. So please keep in mind, you may not be seen to have your hand raised, so there is down below the raise your hand option. As always, I want to remind our committee members as well as the public that the topics being discussed in this venue are engineering and construction logistics related to a proposed conveyance project. We ask that please, folks, keep the discussion on topic. This committee does not oversee policy or determine whether the project will move forward. All we can address is what is in the DCA purview. And as we've seen in the last several meetings, and we'll see more today, there have been a number of design and operations adjustments made by the DCA engineers based on comments by the SEC. And there was quite at the board meeting, we had a wonderful presentation that talked about some of the things that have come about because of your input. So having this focus on this setting has had a tangible impact on how this proposed project is being built. So moving on to item number 3, we have the minutes. And so does anyone have any changes, comments, or questions about the minutes? Please note that you have until Friday to make adjustments by sending these to Jasmine Runquist. So are we done with that? Any comments about the minutes? Nothing?
Sarah, this is Claudia. I wanted to advise that we do actually have one public request.
A public request. Okay, Claudia.
That name is Jocelyn Albert.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to enter public comment later. Is this the wrong thing?
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add you to the other.
My
item.
apologies.
No problem. We'll keep you in here so that you can add public comment later. We want to make sure we hear from you. Okay, so now I guess if we're not done with the minutes review, then what we're going to do is get into 4A. So I'll ask Executive Director Catherine Mallon to please introduce item 4A.
Excellent.
Hold on. Can I hold on just one second? Obviously, we had a little situation at the beginning. I think a lot of Zoom meetings are seeing these little situations. And so the team is working hard to try to manage audio and such. So as you may have seen, everyone got muted and now everyone's unmuted. If you could go back to muting yourself as we move forward, just so that we can, maintain, so that we're not hearing all of the background noise. Thank you.
Yeah, you probably don't want us to hear about what you're telling your child to grab as a snack. So yeah, okay, thank you. All right, then go ahead, Catherine. I'm going to mute myself right now too.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So several of the committee members have commented on how there's been less time in these meetings for each of you to discuss issues amongst yourselves. So for this meeting, we wanted to shift the technical presentations a bit later and allow about a 45-minute window for you all to have an open dialogue. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about where we are in the process and what we still need to do, and maybe help frame the forum a little bit, if I may. So next slide. First, I don't get enough opportunities to thank you all for your time and thoughtful contributions. I think this group has demonstrated that while people may disagree, that we can still come together and speak respectfully. And in some cases, I think we found some areas of common ground. And I know for some of you, this is a difficult participation, but you still come every single month and you take in the new information and make your voices heard. So again, on behalf of myself and the DCA, I just want to thank you. You all make us here on the other side better engineers. Next slide. So today we've covered quite a lot of ground. We've familiarized you all with the overall system. We took deep dives into each of the component pieces. We spent some time reviewing how we did our alternative analysis for site selection, and we worked with you to optimize locations, the size of sites based a lot on your feedback. We spent time on logistics and traffic, again, shifting our plans to reflect your input. We've had discussions on things like RTM and land reclamation and soil conditioners and all these things that have led to changes in the design process. Next. And I think we've made some incredible progress over the past 9 months. I've listed a couple of key areas here where your input has helped us focus our efforts and looking for ways to deal with issues that you all have identified. Across the board, we've looked for ways to make sites smaller. We've moved sites. We've eliminated facilities. We've reduced traffic, and you're going to see a little bit more of that today. We've made some adjustments that better protect some of the natural areas and the recreational activities in the Delta. And a couple of really great examples was eliminating the barging on Bolden Island, and in another case, shifting the maintenance shaft that was previously located near the Woodbridge Reserve. These are just two of the many examples where your contributions have been very helpful. Next. So looking forward, we're generally wrapping up the engineering work on the east and central alignments. There's still some minor updates that we'll need to make. But our major focus over the upcoming meetings is going to shift towards the Bethany alternative, and we're going to start that conversation with you in today's session. We plan to use a similar approach as we did for the east and the central options. We'll review the overall system and then review the siting alternatives and selection process for locating the new shafts, the pump station, and in this case, a buried pipeline alignment. We'll also go through logistics, traffic, RTM management, the similar things that you saw in the East and Central. Next. So with that introduction, I've teed up a couple of questions up here that I was hoping that you all might consider to help guide the conversation. It's mostly centered around listing or commenting on other topics that you'd like us to cover in some future meetings that you think we haven't covered to date, either at all or in sufficient detail. Any improvements you want to see moving forward as we move into the Bethany alternative review. If there's additional outreach that you would like to recommend to the DCA beyond participation in these SEC meetings, we'd love to hear that. And obviously any other topic that you want to share with your fellow SEC members. So with that introduction, Valerie, if you could tap in on how you would like to facilitate this discussion. You're muted.
I am muted. Now I'm unmuted.
There we go.
And we're going to probably do a little more of that today because, again, because of the situation that we heard, the team is trying to provide support on the audio side. So please bear with us as we're moving forwards. There will be times when you can unmute yourself and other times that you won't be able to, but we will unmute you. So that's why we ask that you, of course, use the hand raise component as always. As we move through today, we really want to make sure that we're talking to everyone. We want to encourage conversation. We also want to, of course, focus on the fact that, The only thing we can control is, and support is the engineering and design, as well as the construction logistics. So, obviously we want to focus there so that we can use this time wisely. I've made a list of the general umbrella groups that are represented on this committee, and in order to really kind of draw out all of our members, why don't we start just by going through those groups, and then we can kind of see what people have to say, if in fact you want to see greater depth or have discussions of greater depth about specific issues, or not issues, but the engineering component, about the construction, if there's specific details about a certain the intake or whatever portion of the Southern Complex or any of those areas, we definitely want to get into that. That's the kind of feedback that we really are hoping for as part of this discussion, and we really want us to hear some interaction. So I'm going to start off by just going through some of those greater stakeholder group groups, so that we can actually have that discussion coming from that perspective. So for instance, our tribal representatives, we'd love to hear, we have Jesus, we have Melissa, we'd love to hear of these topics. If there are any other topics, are there questions? Are there issues that you'd like to talk about in more detail? Do you have anything you want to comment on in this discussion? Melissa and Jesus. And congratulations, Jesus, by the way. Are they unmuted?
No, I'm here. And
congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I probably leave that up to Melissa to talk about. I think most of the stuff that we have to say is very similar. I wasn't at the last meeting that we had. I was in a different engagement, so I don't want to speak on something that I wasn't at. So I would ask for Melissa, if she has anything to comment to that.
All right, Melissa, are you on? All right, well, we can go back after. What about, our sport fishing recreation representatives? We have Jim Cox, we have Peter. Wondering if in fact you want to engage, and if there's anything we should be digging deeper on, any additional information on any outreach that we should be doing, anything along those lines? Okay. Jim, Peter, can you unmute them, please? Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you,
Okay.
Jim.
Yeah,
And again, please be patient as we're trying to navigate this. I'm so sorry.
No problem. Only thing I would say about covering more stuff is that every time we brought up discussions about habitat, every time we brought up the plans for what would happen at Clifton Court, we're told it's not part of this project. And I'm starting to really feel like I don't have a place on this committee, because the things that the people that I represent are concerned about is really one thing, is Clifton Court, and you won't discuss it. So it's been very frustrating with, for me, and it sounds like the same stuff we've heard for 25 years about Clifton Court.
Okay. All right.
Not sure if I'm unmuted or not.
You are unmuted, Peter.
Oh, okay.
Well, first, before we go there, I know that we've given answers to Jim in the past about why we can't address this, but I want to make sure that we're addressing it right now. Either Catherine or Carrie, if you want to address, why Clifton Court is out of our scope. Jasmine, can you, or Jennifer, can you unmute Catherine and Carrie?
We're working on it. Our apologies. Catherine?
She says she can't unmute herself. You
Okay.
need to do it.
I just got it.
There you go.
It's actually Carrie that needs to be unmuted.
All right, I think, can you hear me?
There we
Yeah.
go.
Success.
Okay. Success. Sorry, I got distracted by waving. So generally I understand the frustration that this project isn't able to cover everything that everybody wants to hear. And at this point, making major changes to Clifton Court is not part of the Delta Conveyance project. But I think that there are certainly opportunities as we move forward into the environmental phase, that there are a lot of interconnections in terms of impacts and analysis that would be relevant. But at this point, it's not, we sort of discussed this last week, that the focus of the Delta Conveyance project is one piece of the overall water resilience portfolio and everything that's being done related to water in the state. And that's not a part of the effort at this point.
Okay. All right. So Jim, we're gonna ask for your patience as we move through that process, and hope that, and without question, your comments and your participation has been extremely helpful in helping to guide the plans that we currently have. So hopefully you'll see that, and we can find some patience with regard to the Clifton Court issue. But I think everyone understands your frustration. And I think a lot of other members have frustration in different areas that are similar. Peter, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off earlier.
Oh, not a problem. I understand technical difficulties. It's the norm nowadays. First of all, one of the things when I'm going back out to small groups of particularly boaters, since we can't have large meetings and we can't, people where we would go and attend their meeting as a guest and talk about something like this, they're just not there. So instead of doing 100 or 200 people at a time, we're doing 10 when we can round them up. That's one of the tough things. One of the good things is the long book that you gave us, and also the thumb drives that you give us on the meetings and on the information work out very, very well, because you can set up a real quick small meeting with something as small as a laptop or a television and your phone to make it happen. Not as effective, I'm not going to lie to you, but you do get the message out and you do get some good questions. One of the biggest questions we continue to get is interruption of vessel traffic. And especially now with what's going on in our bridges and ferries on the Delta are having some operational issues. So that's one of the other things that's going along with this. It's how we're going to get there, how we're going to move boats. Big events have been canceled. Some big events, on the water events, have been postponed and maybe done at a later date. And if this continues, they're going to find better ways to do them in the future. Sailboat racing, powerboat racing, whatever, fishing tournaments, all those kind of things. If you haven't been on the river, like the Sacramento River up around Sacramento during salmon season, and the salmon derbies are on, and you at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you see 80 boats going down the river at one time. That's the kind of traffic we're talking about. Also, they want to know about, will there be a system set up to tell me where and when you're going to be working that's going to impact the waterway? That's a critical thing. That's that all of them are asking. Where's exactly this going to be? I don't want to come up on this thing at 40 miles an hour.
Sure.
Okay.
Catherine, do you want to tackle a couple of those in terms of what the timing looks like, and will there be notification so that the boaters are prepared and ready to address that, so they're not going down the river at great speed, and suddenly there's
Yeah.
construction.
Well, I had a question back. I mean, if there is a graphic that we could use to help you out in terms of interruption with vessel traffic, we'd be glad to produce that. So I think we'll follow up and see if we can't help you with some communication tools that you can share with your group. But I'll let, I think Phil, maybe if you want to talk just a little bit about the impacts. I think there's, with the barging gone, we're looking at, and the change on Highway 12 to improve the bridge crossing there, I don't see that we're going to have too many impacts to the waterways per se, other than what you might be able to see from the waterway on activities happening on land, with the minor exception, of course, of the intake construction, which we're actually going to cover again today. So, Phil, is there anything else that I'm missing maybe?
No, I think you've got them there. I'm just kind of running through my head if there's any other bridges. There's a few other minor bridge works, but most of them are on places that aren't really, that navigable. Like there's a little bit of widening to support the traffic flow right at the back of Hood on Hood Franklin Road. Potentially a bridge widening on Snodgrass Slough. But most of this stuff is shouldn't have impact the major recreating public. And even the intakes, yes, they do project out into the river, but the river is really wide at all three intake sites. So yeah, there would definitely be people would need to be aware of what's going on at the intakes, and there would be all sorts of navigational things in the river for construction. But I don't see it having a major impact on the ability to get back and forth down the river there.
Yeah, so let's go back. We'll create a map of the delta and circle areas and add notes to that drawing that show where we think we might have noticeable effects to boaters. We can do that.
Now, the Coast Guard has notice to mariners. That's when something unusual, an event or whatever is going to go on in your local waterways. Are we going to be somehow connected with them? That system works very, very well.
This is Phil, Peter. We absolutely must get Coast Guard permits for construction and operation of the intake. So to the extent that they publish, I don't know the details, what the Coast Guard does with the permits they issue, but if that is a connection to with how they communicate with you, then they'll definitely know we're there. But we can do other things like Catherine mentions as well. And I assume during the work, I'm probably speaking a little bit out of turn, but I got to believe there's going to be public information websites and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to hit just a couple more groups because I do want to kind of hit some of the groups that we don't hear from that perspective all the time. And then we are going to open it up. I just wanted to give everyone, I wanted to give our staff, frankly, a chance to deal with the audio. A couple other groups I'm going to hit is the environmental NGOs, our terrestrial and aquatic. That's Sean and Isabella. Is there any issues that you want to hit? Any comments that you want to make? Because of the Brown Act, we're typically pretty programmed, and so we're trying to create some flexibility in here. Sean, Isabella.
I'll say a few things since I don't usually talk. So I'd be kind of remiss not to acknowledge how crazy of times we're living through, right? Like the last week we've had the worst wildfires, worse than all of 2019 just in a week. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. I work, with the legislature, so there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. So the times are making it a little bit hard to fully engage. And I just want to acknowledge that and hope everyone on this committee and everyone watching is, safe and their families are as well. But yeah, I would like to, not necessarily today, but at some point just have an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into Staten Island and the maintenance shaft there. I work for the Nature Conservancy, and obviously TNC owns that island, so we have a little bit of increased interest there. But yeah, happy to offer myself and just acknowledge that times are making things difficult for everybody, and everyone's under increased pressure. So happy to make myself available, as well as my colleagues at TNC.
Okay. Are there any issues that anything we need to go back over and review? Any recommendations with regard to DCA outreach? Isabella?
I think we can follow up with a more detailed presentation on the schedule and what it takes to build a shaft out there and what will happen. I think we'd be glad to do that. We spend more time talking about some of the major facilities and not as much time on these individual maintenance shafts. So I'd be glad to do a presentation for the TNC on the Staten Island shaft.
Yeah, that would be great. Obviously, like kind of coordinating with some of our usual colleagues, whether it's related to the Delta or just general Sacramento enviros in general, has become more difficult. So I totally acknowledge that. But yeah, it would be great. We have some of our staff that work out in the field over there, as well as some of our energy team have fingerprints on it. So yeah, it would be helpful just to get increased communication on that particular one, just because of the role of statin for migratory birds. I know Sean will probably speak to that as well. So yeah, just wanting to acknowledge that. But yeah, a presentation maybe more nuanced would be great. Thanks, Catherine.
Awesome. Okay, Sean, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
I've got a few. The first would be refining the times of usage for the haul roads to the intakes. We've made some progress in where they are. We've shrunk them down, but if we could get some refinement in terms of when they would be used to help minimize some of the impacts, that would be very helpful. Work on a schedule for that. The second is that in the last iteration of this, there was a lot of outreach and stakeholder involvement in dealing with mitigation. Now, I know we're not doing the CEQA part of it, but this is a project with regional impacts to species, and a regional approach to mitigation would be really appropriate. And there's opportunities here that would be worthwhile discussing and trying to include in the plan, not just look at it as direct, indirect impacts, specific site impacts, but look at it as a regional effort. I think that would pay dividends. And I would imagine for other stakeholders too, a bit of a discussion of how do we offset some of these impacts would be very useful, whether it's for fishing or recreation or whatever else. And the third one was the filter discussion for knocking out different alternatives last meeting was not very satisfactory for the environmental community. It seemed very subjective. There were no metrics. There was not the level of scientific and engineering refinement that we're used to for this group. So we're kind of a little bit baffled as to kind of the hard-hitting science went behind tossing out some of those alternatives. It seemed more subjective than anything else. That'd be my three.
All right.
I can hit the first one. So we redid all the traffic histograms, and you're going to get a new book. And that book will hit every single site and give you the traffic histogram to that site so that you'll see the time of traffic counts. So that is getting QC'd right now. I hope that'll be done in about a week. And you'll get the hard copy printout of that along with an electronic version if you'd like as well. And then I'll let Carrie deal with the other two issues as that relates to her presentation.
For that first one, Catherine, are we to take it then that those histograms are the last word on that, or there's an ability to refine them a little bit?
Certainly if you have some comments on the histograms, we hadn't had comments on the histograms previously, but we'd welcome them now that you'll see, you'll have an updated version. The intakes I don't think have changed significantly, just a little bit. But certainly you can keep comments. There's not, now that we're down to one route to get to the intakes, from Twin Cities on Lambert to the haul roads, there's not a lot of opportunity to, we'd have to go back to shifting the traffic around to other roads, which we migrated away from to focus on Lambert. So, I mean, if there's some ways that, if you think there's some windows where you want us to be more sensitive to than others, we can think about the construction sequence, certainly. But no, the door's still open for comments once you get those histograms.
Okay, thank you.
And Carrie, the other two questions had to do with mitigation and the filter for knocking out the alternatives.
So for the mitigation and the public process there, I understand it's different from WaterFix. You know, WaterFix started off as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which was a habitat conservation plan, which inherently has a different public process and public interaction. So for the environmental process, because that isn't an SEC function, we're still working through how we want to involve the public in all of that. We are going to have some public opportunities. It probably won't be as in-depth as the SEC, but we definitely want to have meaningful public engagement as we move through the environmental process as well. And we're still working through a lot of that. Moving over towards the alternative filters, I think that the alternative filter process is definitely a lot different than what's been happening in the SEC so far. You know, a lot of what's going on within the SEC is really going through all of the details and the design that's going on, and it is an incredibly in-depth process. And what we were trying to accomplish last month was really provide the context and an overview for where we're going. The environmental document will have a much greater level of detail than what I presented during the meeting. We're still developing that at this point. We're really at the upfront end. But what we're trying to do is explain to people the context for what we're going to be asking the DCA to do with this new alternative. There will be more detail coming, but at the moment, we were trying to do the in-progress update of where we are.
All right. All right.
I think there was a question on the regional review. Carrie, did we miss that?
I would say more regional.
Or something. Yeah. Go ahead, Sean.
I was suggesting a regional mitigation strategy as opposed to the typical indirect direct impacts for each footprint of the project.
Looking at the strategies for mitigation, we're still a ways off from that, but yeah, I hear your suggestion.
All right. Starting to open it up a little bit. Anna does have her hand up. Anna, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I've got some questions. We still have questions about the cranes. How are you going to ensure that tunneling underneath their sacred roosting sites is going to be safe and that we're not driving them away when all of these other organizations are doing so much to try to preserve and protect them? Friend Sean over there. And then we haven't had a lot of discussion about the impacts on the actual communities, such as Hood, which is a primarily Native American community. Over 50% of their community is Native American, and we really need to focus on the impact of the legacy towns that this project is going to basically eliminate. We haven't talked a lot about noise. We were expecting some follow-up on whatever the mitigations were going to be on that, and there's still some questions about that. The impact on Twin Cities, not only to recreational boating, but to the ability of the farmers to be able to get in and out and to be able to move their crops in the harvest. To this past month and a half, we've had Paintersville Bridge closed, and it has had a huge impact. If the notification system is anything like it's been for Paintersville, it's been very painful. We got notification and very confusing signage, so nobody knew when the bridge was going to be closed. They're relying more on word of mouth and social media among communities than on the actual official signage, because it turns out that it's not correct. I spoke with some farmers about the ludicrous plan of scraping off the topsoil and then distributing the tunnel muck and then replacing the topsoil. No one that I've spoken to, and there was probably 300 years worth of farming experience between these guys, think that that's a good idea. They think that it's going to destroy the ecosystem of the soil here in the Delta, and that it will make the ground unfarmable. There's a lot of concern that there's a specific farmer whose property is deemed to be a burrow pit, and he had no idea until he was shown the map. And so there's a lot of feeling like decisions are being made about people's property, and that eminent domain is on the horizon. And it's hard not to feel that way since they haven't even had initial notification that they are in the target. And then I have a question about the draft engineering report and the final that's supposed to be out any minute. that really leads the way the project is going to be actually built. And I'm wondering about the county input. Has that happened? Have the counties been afforded an opportunity to participate in that process? Have they seen the draft engineering report? Can we see the draft engineering report? What's the timeline on the draft engineering report to the final? And then my final question is, I noticed when I was looking at the materials that came out of the DCA meeting that the timeline had changed, which was a little frustrating because we were assured that we had to stay on this fast track for these SEC meetings because the timeline was not going to change. And clearly the timeline has been changed and delayed. So I'd like some clarification on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. That's a lot of questions. I jotted down a number of them. In terms of timeline, I think we're going over that next. So if you can hold on that. With regard to notification, why don't we hit that first? Carrie, if you can address that, because I know that that's been a discussion.
Well, I can hit that one, I think. Yeah, obviously, community communications is going to be a huge part during the construction process. So, I mean, every site will have communication specialists that are coordinating and managing that work. I don't think it's an area where I don't think that's an area where we're going to struggle in the future. I think we're going to nail that one. But I mean, it's a ways off right now, right?
The draft engineering report, Carrie or Catherine? I think that's a different project.
Yeah, I think what Carrie's going to speak to is her revised schedule. I think that's largely driven by Army Corps participation, which is then going to have a residual effect on our delivery of our engineering plans. So I think we can cover that in Carrie's presentation.
Perfect.
But I can tell you this, the engineering plans are not imminent, and all of the drawings that will be included, certainly the concepts have all made their way through this committee first. So there's not going to be any surprises when the report comes out, at least none that, I mean, I think any surprises would be a surprise to me.
So, she brought up also noise and discussions about impacts to Hood. Do you want to address those?
Yeah, we did set up a meeting to meet with some key leaders in Hood for last week, but because of the smoke, we had to postpone it. It was an outdoor meeting because of COVID. Smoke's moving us indoor, COVID's moving us outdoor. So we're just going to need to reschedule that in the next week or two. And I think that's just going to be an ongoing dialogue there.
And then the noise issue. I know that actually there's been a lot of work done. I think Phil's going to handle some of that, but if you want to address any of that right now.
I think Phil's going to cover some of the noise issues at the intakes in his presentation today.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, moving to David Glosky.
Hi, let's see, I'd like to bring up the topic of benefits. And, it looks like we're at a period of time where we've gone through a lot of the technical information, we've provided inputs. It's really great that you have a list of successes that the committee has participated on. And it feels like there's a lot of good faith participation by everybody here, in different aspects of the Delta. And I've kind of been beating the drum for a while now. And I was a little surprised when the budget came out and there wasn't any discussion or budget line items for, anything like dual use facilities, a lot of the benefits, the visitor centers that we were talking about, other types of things. And I'm getting concerned, that it's not going to ever be addressed. When I've done projects like this with multiple companies, for example, and everybody's got a different role, I would put together something called an opportunity matrix, which lists every participant and what they put in and what they get back out of it. And I'd love to encourage something like that because I can kind of see, the water boards, they're putting in money and they're getting their water and all of that. And what's the delta? We're putting in our time and we're giving our comments. And what's coming back? We're having to deal with all of this stuff and you're taking the water. And I think it's kind of raising this participation to a different level. And I know that there's, we're not in the mainstream of the payments and the money flows, but we're a neighbor and we're the people that you're affecting. And I think it's time that we kind of raised up and asked to be treated a little bit better in terms of, what are the benefits? What are the people getting out of it in this area? What's this area getting out? And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, the tribes, the fishing people, to not just, make a comment about this area or that area, but start to ask for specific things. Like, I don't know what the issue is in Clifton Court, but let's frame it as this is what we want out of it. And I don't know if there's anything that the tribes have that they would like, what would we like out of it? I know the people in Discovery Bay would like to have an ability to flush the South Delta when the water quality is bad and there's algae problems. And I've talked to people. I did talk to voters. I went out to Bullfrog Landing and spent 3.5 hours on a really hot day talking with boaters as they were coming in for gas. And the only thing that I could get them at all interested in is the fact that there were some benefits coming back to them out of this whole thing. And then you could actually see them, start to listen. Like, okay, you're going to help me with my sloughs and keep them clear. All right, now I'm listening. Oh, this algae problem, you have a way of helping me with that? Okay, now I'm listening. So I think it's time that we start to put some of those things on the table and not push it down the road anymore and start to have some real discussions on it.
Great. Again, in the spirit of getting everyone involved in the discussion, I know that there are several members who are interested in this discussion. I really want to create a free flow of discussion if possible. Catherine, you can jump in, but if there are members who also want to jump in on this topic, and we can start, having that discourse that I think we've all been craving for a minute, and that's a little hard virtually, but I think, after all this time, I think we may be able to get there. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on that?
I wouldn't mind just real quickly with David. I agree with what you're saying. And I think Carrie and I are in agreement on what you're saying in terms of the community benefits. We recognize that. I think I was explicit in the cost estimate presentation to the board that was an item that was known to need to be included, but it was not included in the numbers that we pulled together. And it's in the text of the slide, and it will certainly be in the meeting minutes. It's not an item that we left out because it's trivial or it's not important. It's just the estimate at this point for the water contractors was really focused on the design and construction work that the DCA is responsible for. But it definitely will be a topic of future discussion in some forum.
Jasmine, do me a favor, take down the PowerPoint so we can see each other's faces so that it'll expand the number of people. Thank you. All right. Moving forward on this topic or whatever else anyone else wants to speak to, again, I'd like to kind of create more of a free flow. Jim Wallace, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I appreciate that there's been an awful lot of engineering and design detail, and it's really given all of us a greater understanding of the project. And early on in the project, Catherine kept talking about mutual benefits of this project. And I could tell that there's a certain amount of frustration that she wasn't getting feedback. And I told Catherine privately that I don't think there are any mutual benefits. But what I think there is an opportunity to begin a process to identify what are typically called community benefits. And I don't mean subdivision for a subdivision or a community. It's really a Delta-wide benefit. But the common terminology is usually community benefit and community benefit agreements, which are a formalized process. And so what I'd really like to see happen is for the SEC and the DCA to take the lead to establish a way to begin to identify how a mutual benefit agreement could be reached. I'm not talking about reaching that agreement, but I'm talking about figuring out a way to have a lot of people come to the table and identify a process that benefits that accrues to the Delta. And I know this sounds like an unnecessary exercise probably, but given all the players in the Delta, the nuances of this project, it seems to me that a process to begin to identify a process is necessary. And And I know that the players have to be identified in a little better way. I mean, look, the JPA and the DCA, the state water contractors, we don't have to hide this fact that Metropolitan Water District is the elephant in the room, and they control a lot of this process. But I think that Met, they own about 2.5% of the Delta, and they own those 2 islands and 2 tracks in the Central Delta. I think that they would welcome an opportunity to sit down with those of us who live and work and raise families in the Delta to talk about what kind of benefits could accrue throughout the Delta. And it just sounds like a broken record every time I say Delta, but that's really the only way I can explain this. And given that Met has publicly come out and supported the Delta Protection Act co-equal goals, it just seems to me that they would welcome another chance to sit down with those of us who are affected by the project. I don't have any idea what those benefits look like. I mean, we can all guess, we can all hope, but I think there needs to be a process to get there. And look, Met has, they have a really interesting quote on their webpage, and it says that, and remember, Met is the major recipient of the State Water Project water. They say State Water Project is a foundational network woven into the fabric of our communities from the Bay Area to the Delta, or from the Bay Area to San Diego. So it just seems to me that Met has already demonstrated publicly that they would like the opportunity to engage more actively with those of us who live here and affected by this project. So, for lack of calling it anything else, I'd call it phase 1 negotiation, or a process to sit down and see if we can negotiate something with Met. And this is very ambiguous right now, but it just seems to me that for those of us who live here, if we don't move forward like that with something like this, with the community benefit, we really stand the chance of becoming another Owens Valley. And I don't want to replicate another century of animosity which exists between Met's major ally, the LA Department of Water and Power, in the Owens Valley. If any of you have ever been on the east side of the Sierra, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I have to believe that an unproductive outcome between the folks who live and work in the Delta and the state water contractors is just not something that makes any financial, public relations, or any kind of sense at all, and that we need to find a process to come up with an agreement on how to move forward with benefits. And so, look, to be clear, I don't endorse this conveyance project. And our family is going to be one of the half a dozen families that are directly impacted by this project. I mean, by loss of property, loss of property values. And so I would hope that, my friends in Hood, those of us who live in Cortland, who are going to be irreparably changed by this project, have the opportunity to meet with state water contractors and with Met, and that can be facilitated through the SEC to find some common ground. Look, this fight's been going on a long time. I know there are certain people who don't want us that have told me, geez, you shouldn't be on the SEC because you're talking to the enemy. I don't find that viable alternative to finding solutions. So I just hope that moving forward, the SEC can take the lead in opening up some lines of communications with their partners on the Joint Powers Authority and with those of us who live and work here in the Delta. Thanks.
All right.
Hey, Jim, this is Carrie. I think that's a great suggestion, and I know there are lots of people, so I don't want to talk for too long, but I really appreciate those ideas. I think they're pretty in line with what we were thinking, that we are looking to try to work on a process and then come and talk to the SEC about that process. I know that I always say we're not ready yet, and I know how frustrating that is, but we are working on it, and we're getting ready to move towards being able to talk more, but it's still a little bit away, hopefully by the end of the year. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie.
All right, Gil, go ahead. I saw your hand is up, and then Barbara. It'll be Gil, Barbara, and then Lindsay. Go ahead, Gil.
Yeah, I still have comments in the open forum, but I just want to address Jim's comments. First of all, Jim, that was a great speech. I want to elect you president of the Delta. But I mean, we were never fooled to believe this is going to be a collaboration. I mean, it's always been a compromise, and the changes that have been made have been, compromises to kind of make things a little easier on birds or whatever. But if we could ever get to collaboration, that would be a huge plus. I don't know if we ever will. It's hard because the Delta's got different areas, different viewpoints, different impacts. But certainly, if we could head in that direction, I think it'd be a positive note. But I've got comments in the form also, but that's all for now.
All right. Anything else just to close out this topic? Anyone else? All right. Then we're going to do Barbara and Lindsay, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm kind of building on everything I think that's been said before. I agree with Sean about being pretty distraught that the information provided as to why there is going to be no analysis done on the no tunnel alternative. It's just been scrapped without any background information. And not because we don't believe that the tunnel is not your preferred project. I just really think that if you want to get to honesty and transparency, the rationale needs to be put out fully now. Otherwise, it's going to look like post hoc rationalization in the EIR to justify, and we're going to end up going on and on fighting forever. And so I think the more that you can explain about that decision, because we're still and always will be after the water quality analysis that goes with drought. Which brings me to my second point. Last month, when I reached out to you about water quality, we were promised something was going to happen today. Our water danger thresholds in San Joaquin County are 220 times higher this morning than what is considered the danger threshold. Because of the bacteria from the harmful algal blooms, which have spread now into the central delta, the south delta. My problem with the whole process is that while I understand we're only dealing with construction here, the things that we've needed to see from DWR simultaneously around water quality, it hasn't happened. And I understand we're all working under COVID. I understand people are stressed. Small community groups are the most stressed. We have the fewest resources. And yet, even when we told you to slow things down to work with people, we've risen and we haven't gone anywhere and we keep interacting. But there has to be some, Jim's talking about it in terms of community benefits. My fear is that by the time you have that discussion and anything gets put into place with the project, we're going to lose control of the estuary. So I would say that if you really want to demonstrate good faith in the Delta, some of the proactive discussions around water quality, around levee protection for urban areas in those small towns with high EGA populations need to be happening simultaneously. The last part is a question maybe for Catherine Mellon. In the traffic histograms, the new updates, do you have any better information around the port? When we talked before, you told me you couldn't really say what was going to come from the port. It depended on sourcing, but here's my problem. CARB has sent a pretty strong letter to the port about 2 ongoing processes right now. About failure to do outreach, about increased air pollution in the community. And we just have this deadly mix in San Joaquin County around HABs air pollution, COVID discharge into the waterways from the homeless, and water quality issues. So we're doing our good work on that front on air quality, but if we're going to get them on 2 other things, we need to get them on 3. We need to be able to push on what we really need to mitigate for air quality impacts to one of the most vulnerable communities in California. We're not coming off the COVID watch list. our numbers are not going down. We're still 500, 400 cases a day right now. Most of them are happening in that same community. So a lot of these issues, there's committee work, there's input people can do from committees. I feel like it's life and death. I feel like it's life of the waterways and the estuary. It's literally life and death for people. And so I guess I want to be charitable in spirit. I don't want to be just grumpy on the calls. But I don't know what else to do because people we know are the ones who are that we love are being the ones who are being impacted.
Well, yeah, Barbara, absolutely. I think we're in the same place around the air emissions. You'll get the histograms. They'll show the amount of truck traffic that's going to the site. Again, we don't know how much will come through the port because we don't know where we're going, where the contractors who will be constructing these facilities will be procuring all of their materials. Certainly some of them will use the port and swing it over to the site. Others may truck it to the site. We've made some assumptions there and it's all in the histogram, so you'll see that. Carrie's team, hopefully Carrie chimes in. I mean, Carrie right now is the one, we hand the data to her team and they're looking at the environmental impacts of the amount of material in the trucks that need to come to the site. And she's the one who's going to be doing the analysis of the impact and she'll be doing the identification, the mitigation work. But obviously, she's going to be sensitive to those issues that you're speaking to. I think we all are. In fact, I mean, a lot of our work is looking at the future of construction vehicles and what is moving to hybrid and to electric. And we're going to be keeping a close eye on that. And I also think that by partnering with other of the large construction entities in the state, that maybe through some kind of collaboration and partnerships, we might be able to move the industry along even faster than it's moving right now. So, I mean, all these things that you're talking about are things that we're going to be paying close attention to in our work. And we're very much aware of the situation in San Joaquin, and Sacramento to some degree has some of those same issues as well. So yeah, very much on our minds.
Yeah, and Catherine, I think that was a good summary of the air quality, but I did want to just go back to the water quality thought for a minute. And while in general, water quality management is part of the state board responsibility, we at DWR have been talking about the idea that we are interested in trying to figure out ways that we can help. And that's something we're just starting to explore. It's not really part of the Delta Conveyance project, but because it's so interconnected, I'm trying to stay as up to date and help where I can as well. One of the first things that we want to try to do is to help improve understanding of it, because we think that, you know, when we talk about the term HABs, what we've seen is that people don't always know what we're talking about. And so we want to build on some of the work that's been done. As we've been doing some of the COVID activities, we've been producing what we call deep dive videos, where we're trying to cover a topic in a little bit more depth in a video on our website. And we're looking at trying to do one of those about HABs and explain some of those issues. And then from there, move in towards some of the ways that we might be able to help with some of these. So Barbara, we are working on trying to figure out where to go next on that.
I can't stress this enough. A video's nice, but if they, you know, yes, the water board is in charge of water quality, but the problem is that what is being planned between the VAs has a direct impact according to the best available science on HABs. And I can't stress this enough. If you are just pushing this project forward and not dealing with the immediate problem, it becomes impossible for us to hold on to goodwill. 220 times over the danger level. I can't stress this enough. There has to be a task force. It has to be put together faster. Because if you don't do the good work while you're pushing what we're recalcitrant about, I don't know how I get to a place with you that there's a real community benefit.
I think it would be really helpful maybe to talk about this more in depth offline, so that we can, I know that there are like 9 or 10 additional speakers, Valerie, but Barbara, can I follow up with you so that we can make sure we're on the same page? Okay, thank you.
Well, and you know, the other thing that's being raised by, you know, that we hear consistently is that there are a lot of issues that are outside of this realm. And in order to be productive here, we have to stay within the realm. Otherwise, we go down a lot of different paths that we actually have no control over. But, perhaps what we can look at is the fact that this framework has actually been productive. And we've actually been able to make some changes as a result of the discussions that happen here. And perhaps this can be replicated in other spaces. So with that, Lindsay Liebig, Peter Robertson, Douglas, and then we'll go from there. We're gonna have to kind of pick up the pace a little bit. Again, we want some free form, but we also want everyone to be able to speak. Lindsay, go ahead. I'm hopeful that you can speak because of the audio situation.
There we go.
There you go.
Just want to add a couple things on in full agreement with Sean's comment about really just looking at kind of timeline and how things are changing, and that was a little caught off guard last meeting, and so still trying to digest that. We're still struggling and really getting the information out to the people. What I've been working on these last couple months is really taking not only where the you take the mapping book and overlaying that, but working directly with those landowners, because they don't know it's coming down the pipeline. They know the project's there, but they don't know that it's directly impacting their land in some capacities, and some things have shifted. So I'm getting a lot of these like deer in the headlights look, like, oh, it's impacting me actually directly. And so we're having some of those conversations. I will say ag community wise, the biggest thing that we're still concerned about that I think needs some more discussion in really looking at that is the overall impact to the agricultural community within the area. Yes, we have the exact construction footprints on what those look like, but what we're seeing and what we're anticipating is there's going to be so many ripple effects on what that construction is going to do to the outlying agricultural areas around there, that we see more ag going out of production outside of just the general construction areas that are being impacted. And so that's something that needs to get, I think, vetted through a little bit more, because we're starting to look at who's directly impacted potentially by eminent domain, but then who's going to be impacted on the actual ability to adequately farm that to the capacity that they're doing now. And so we think there actually is going to be a greater effect on agricultural productivity outside of the general construction zone. Additionally, we have farmers, and I know we've talked about this with both Catherine and Graham and Nasli, but looking at, we're still not convinced about the tunnel muck and the where that's going to impact the land that's there, and the feasibility of actually using that material and not contaminating other areas, and any contaminants that are pulled out of there. And so that's a concern that still remains. And and really I would say the most difficult part of this entire process is we're kind of running two streams at the same time. We're participating in this sector, and I'm like, Jim, I got a lot of pushback for getting involved in this early on, because, people were saying that you're being, part of the process and not working. And I said, well, you got to be at the table to have, the actual conversation. But like Jim, I had a lot of pushback as well from our community. But it's very hard to talk about the construction side of the project without talking about the other things outlying over here. That's a very hard position to be in when we're actively looking at all of these things over here. So it's like, well, how do we ask the questions without bringing the concerns in of why we have that? And so I think this process has been very informative, but it's also just very one-sided, because we can't get into some of those discussions that I think would really benefit from all of our collaboration on some of those things. And so struggling with that. It's also hard to sell this process with the community when the EIR and alternatives haven't been vetted. That's also a very difficult process. So I have a lot of people that look at me, they're like, how do you plan for a project when we haven't even gone through that this is the right project to have? And I can't answer that question because I don't understand that myself. I just know that these two projects are running, or processes are running simultaneously, and we have to be involved in both. But I understand that in order to put out an EIR, there has to be a project, in place. But seeing that after the presentation last month and seeing that those projects are being vetted in a different way than what this one is, that's just not selling on a lot of community, support that this iteration is any different than previous ones. So I'm still getting a lot of skepticism, in trying to talk about it. Still getting a lot of the same questions, and a lot of the questions I'm getting, I can't bring up here because we can't talk about it. So it's a hard spot to be in, because I just don't feel like I'm bringing in the right content and the right questions because we can't address some of those things. So that's the struggles we're having in the ag community.
And
go ahead, Nestle.
Thank you. I'd love to touch base with you at least on some of the outreach you've done. A lot of folks who have sort of points on the maps are being reached out to anyway because of the geotech work that will be happening. But that Venn diagram is not a complete circle, right? So I think there's folks where there's no geotech, but you're right, they're going to see points on the map and be concerned. And it's hard for us because we say, and it's absolutely true, it's illustrative, it's for illustrative purposes only. Nothing's been decided yet, but I think we owe them a conversation or at least a heads up. So, and they may have any number of questions and we'd love to get in touch. So if it's okay, can I reach out to you? And
yeah, absolutely. And we're actually, I've got maps, I've got things, we're trying to map everybody out.
Yeah.
My more thing is I just want people aware that they're in the direct impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that, Lindsay, has been a topic of discussion internally, especially now that we're about to release the virtual tours. So we have made a commitment to reach out to all of the folks where there is potential siting of facilities. A lot of them have already been talked to because they're also not coincidentally sites for geotechnical exploration. So, as Carrie had said earlier, there were postcards sent out to everybody at the start of this process. And, I actually went back and looked at what our original maps were and where we are today. And just about every facility on the map, with a couple of exceptions, has moved. So, it would have been premature earlier to start contacting people. But certainly now that we're kind of narrowing in on some sites, we think it's really appropriate that we give folks a call and make them aware of the material that's out there. And then if they want us to talk to them in more detail, we're going to follow up with them. So there is a commitment to let them know.
Yep, that's the best thing, because we've got to get them engaged in this process early so that we're not repeating ourselves over and over and over with all the same information.
I agree.
Those things. And so we're trying to do more of an informative base to make sure where they are, who they are, that types of things. And what we're finding is, a lot of the landowners that may be getting notified aren't the management that's actually working and farming a lot of that land too. So we're trying to bridge the connection of making sure that not only is it the landowner that's being contacted, but it's those that are actually working the land and that will have the direct impacts, because there may be some lease agreements, there may be different things, all that in play that may not always be getting translated to the right area. So
those are good points.
There just can be multi-layers to that.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to be a little mindful of time. I think we're going to have this conversation for about another 5-10 minutes at most, because otherwise we'll never get through the agenda. And we do have quite a bit of public comment today. So Douglas, Mike Moran, Mike Hardesty, go ahead, Douglas.
Hi. Okay. I want to say that I echo with David and Jim. We have been accused of talking to the enemy. And I think we are living in the era of unconvention. So I think we've got a great group of people here. And I think it is a good opportunity that DCA can bridge the SEC members with people like that and other water board and other parties to start a dialogue, because I think this is a great opportunity. We have got an unconventional group of SEC members, and let's make use of it. And then we'd also like to talk about from the perspective of legacy time, like water growth and lock. Seemingly that we are away from the harm's way, but indeed, out of the fate of all this legacy time, okay, we are away from the harm's way because of the haul road, the distance from the tunnel. But the fate of our community lies with the whole Delta. So the well-being of the whole Delta affects the legacy town like Rock and Water Grove, Cortland, and of course we are now nervous about Hood. And so that's what I want to say. So.
All right, thank you, Douglas.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. Those are pretty incredible towns to the Delta. Yeah, so we're going to do some more outreach there. Make sure everyone is informed.
Great. All right, Mike Moran.
Hi, thanks everybody. It's going to be a bit of an echo of a lot of things. I think that at a previous meeting when Jim mentioned Delta character, that seems to be the major concern here, and that hopefully one of the benefits of this process, which I've been very appreciative of, it's great to see some specific movement of infrastructure based on input from this committee. I think that shows that it's sincere and it's legit and it has impacts. But I hope that the lasting benefit will be all the talk about what's outside the scope of this committee. That what's really important to stakeholders is what will happen to this place. And I think the community benefits being discussed as part of a project, and that if a community benefit requires an engineering change, then it might have to be considered during part of this project. And I think it already has. I think we've already seen some of that. But I think as we see things of benefits coming down the road of how do you enhance water quality at the Stockton port of Stockton, how do you, anyway, something along those lines, but those might require engineering fixes. And so to be maybe broaden the purview of this committee, that we might be able to incorporate those things and have some kind of a mechanism to make sure that these concerns get pushed forward. I think everybody's sincere in listening and saying that they're important, but the real importance is how they will be applied going forward. So I think we're off to a great start. It's very heartening. I think it's a step one in a multi-step process. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, Mike Hardesty. Mike.
Yes.
There you are.
I'll try to narrow this down a bit. I think David Glosky started this conversation by saying you need to look at the benefits of the project as well as other things. And I think that in my mind is the difficulty for Solano County interests is the focus is so narrowly concentrated on the engineering aspects of it. It is very difficult to get an audience in the western region of this north part of the Delta, that because that's not the issue for them. They've been looking at Delta conveyance for a good many years, and it's kind of distant to them. But what I think we've focused on here is for too long is a narrow view of the project by excluding these expected consequences or impacts. And so as much as benefits are important, so are the impacts that are created by the project. And so I'm suggesting, I guess, that in every project, whether it's in the conceptualization of the project, whether it's in the design or implementation of projects, you always have to look at both benefits, why are you doing it, but also what are the consequences of doing it. And in the case of the northwestern portion of the Delta, those issues that are important to the region are these impacts or consequences of building and operating the project, such as water quality, alterations in the flow of channels that feed the western portion of the Delta, particularly north and immediately south of Rio Vista. Water surface elevations. Do you alter the ability of farmers on these tributary channels that come off the main stem of the river heading to the west and southwest? Are they still able to use siphons as a means of irrigating? These are not unlike traffic studies, and you've done a pretty good job with the traffic studies from what I can see. But I think it's time to have that conversation on the changes in the hydrodynamic changes that occur by the construction not so much the construction, but the operation of a completed project. That's where you'll get, I think, the greatest interest on the Solano side, speaking for them. It's also the reason why it's very difficult to talk to them, because if we're narrowly focused on just the engineering of a project, it just doesn't resonate over here. These other things far eclipse that as an area of interest, and until you start to answer those questions, even if it's preliminarily in the project, as we start to see that it is coming to some level of completion in its design, or it's the vision of the project, then it's time to start talking about what are those impacts, and what is the state, again, back to David's, where he started his conversation, what are the benefits that can offset those consequences? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we have David Glosky, Mel Lytle, and Gilbert Cosio. So David, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm going to be really quick on this, and it's just a request maybe for Carrie. I'm interested in like what, and this might be one of the things that's like on the periphery of this group, but it's certainly related to our discussions that we're having with people. And I'd like to hear, is there a task force at DWR for this algae problem? What's going on? I mean, it gets worse every year. Is there a plan? Is there a strategy? I mean, I keep waiting to hear that and read about it, and I haven't heard it. And it'd be great to hear about it in this meeting, just so we can get educated a bit.
So we can think about what we can bring back. So the state board has a network that includes state, federal, tribal, local representatives that is focused on HABs and other algal bloom issues. But I will say I'm not the expert. I definitely need to phone a friend in terms of getting an expert in to talk about that. So there are stakeholder involvement efforts that are out there. I suspect that they're not everything that Barbara is looking for, which is why I want to talk to her offline and better look at where there might be gaps and what else is needed.
Great. All right.
Can I just chime in here?
Yes.
I mean, for lack of a more elegant way, we did put this committee in a box to serve exclusively the DCA, because the DCA was responsible for giving Carrie's team a set of engineering documents so that she could do her assessment. And I think what you guys have expressed periodically is the frustration of being in that box. And I think it's put Carrie sort of in a difficult position, because she has to be the one that has to be the one that says, well, that's outside the purview of this committee. And then when we hand over the documents to her and she begins her environmental process, now you're under the box of CEQA, right? Which is not a great box either. And, Jim Walls can attest to some of the constraints within CEQA as well as a member here. So, I mean, I think Carrie is, if it didn't have to be that way, we certainly wouldn't want it to be that way. If this could be just more of an wider open forum, that would be great, because that's the way humans work, right? But it's sometimes not the way that regulations necessarily work. So, Carrie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. I feel like this is just the first step of communication, and then the ball gets handed to you where a lot of the assessment happens, and then it really, you're driving the train on this outreach and the forums that you choose to use for that, and we are literally in the backseat on that.
I think that that's a good assessment. And one of the things that we've been mentioning is that we are still sort of trying to explore our options for outreach related to the CEQA process to go above and beyond what's required for CEQA. But I do hear, as you said, Catherine, there is continuing frustration that we can't cover more CEQA related analysis in this group. And yeah, I don't enjoy being the bad guy on that one, but I understand how frustrating it is to all of you.
Right. We're going to go to Dr. Lytle, and then Gil Cosio, Cece, Anna, and then Melissa will be the last speaker in this discussion. All right, Dr. Lytle.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. I mirror a number of the things that have already been said regarding any additional studies, analysis on tunnel muck quality, things of that nature. The traffic histograms, I think, is another one. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, has there been 2 additional expert reports that have been completed? But I think we only really analyzed one of them. And so I'm not sure what the status is on those. Something that I think would be productive regarding outreach, particularly with locals, smaller groups. Now that you have essentially proposed alignments, potentially some design engineering information, you released your cost estimate, things of that nature. If you could capture that and put it into a small-ish type of presentation that we could circulate or allow folks to share with other people, I think it would be very helpful for us. Otherwise, I have to go through all the other presentations and try to, copy and paste various slides in some way. So that's one recommendation I have as far as outreach goes, because I think that given today's day and age, it's really difficult, to try to share things over Zoom. So if it could be condensed into something that would be easier to use, I think would be helpful. It's interesting that I know at the board meeting there was this, Catherine gave the presentation on the 6 areas that the SEC has had impact in the design discussion. And, this is kind of an interesting thing because there's something called value engineering. And when the design engineers go through all their process at the end, then they have some people go in and say how you could develop value. And meaning how could they cost save? And this has been kind of an interesting exercise in that I think there's been a preliminary value engineering that the SEC has produced as far as our comments and how they've changed the overall dynamic of the project currently. And so is there a value there? Is there a benefit cost that we've provided to the ECA regarding our comments? It's kind of an interesting question. I think that's primarily I have. Just one final comment. How long is the SEC going to continue to meet? And that's all I have. Thanks.
All right, Catherine.
I'm echoing. I don't know what happened. Anyway, yeah, value engineering obviously is going to be a part of the program delivery. It wouldn't be a program without it, so that absolutely will be happening in the future. ITR reports are always reviewed at the board meetings. They're very technical. If there's anything that we think affects the stakeholders, we certainly can bring them here, but really the DCA board meetings are where you can get the presentations on the results of the ITR. In terms of outreach, I think you have a very good point, breaking down a lot of our presentations into smaller snippets that are more that you can just grab and go with. I think that's a great comment. And as we launch our new website, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity to post those types of things. So we'll take a look at that. And then in terms of the SEC schedule, I think that's something that we're going to want to talk to you some more about, and some of it will depend on how I think DWR and Carrie's team and our team utilize the SEC moving forward. So we'll come back to you. But in terms of the work that we need to do on the Bethany alternative, which again is what the core purpose of this group is the commenting on the engineering. We'll need through this year to circle that through with you all. So I think next year it's more open, up in the air on what we do. And I think there's been a lot of feedback here that there are certain topics that the SEC would like to stay engaged in a longer term. So that's definitely something that we would also be interested in as well, but sensitive to your commitments and time as well. So.
Okay. Nazli, your hand's up. Are you wanting to comment on the outreach component, or are you fine? Can you unmute Nazli? There she is.
Sorry, yeah, I was raising my hand to mute. No, what I want to say to Mel was, aside from what Catherine said about the website and whatnot, if there are specific areas that you would like sort of condensed or specific topics, please be in touch. We kind of keep saying this. The only thing I can't do is read into all of your minds. So I think it's a great suggestion to make presentations that are a little bit more digestible, but I imagine some of your audience is looking for something specific. So if you could get back to me about what those things are, we'd be happy to put the presentations together for you. And anything we do for one group, we're more than happy to put up as a resource for others as well.
Great. Let's see. Gilbert Cosio, go ahead.
Okay. This has gone on longer than you planned, I know. So I'll try to cut my comments short.
But it's good discussion. So, there you go.
We only see each other once a month. So
that's right. We miss you.
I want to just comment on the screening criteria that we talked about that was presented by Carrie last month. Just a few comments. I do believe they're subjective too. I'd like to see the actual data. But if you actually look at the data that's out there, especially on the levees, the levee that the intakes are being constructed on is Maintenance Area 9, which is maintained by the state. It's part of the federal project levee of the Sacramento system. It's the weakest levee of the entire North Delta. The Delta Stewardship Council, DLIS, estimated both combined seismic and flood probability of failure. It's about a 14-year protection, where the levee across the Channel Merritt Islands about 49 year, the levee downstream on Pearson District's about 36 years. So it's not like this best alternative, and the others, just because they don't meet the seismic resiliency or whatever, they got thrown out. This is a levee that you could isolate your intakes pretty easily with a pretty good sized flood. They leak. These are actually pretty small compared to some of the other levees in that system. We're currently working on an MA9 levee, trying to help a farmer replace that irrigation pipe, and we went to compact material to fill up the excavation. We couldn't get compaction because the levee is so dry, it's so sandy that we could not get compaction to meet the floodboard. So it's a pretty big of a problem. Then the last thing I want to comment on are some of the assumptions that were made, especially the water quality. The North Delta Water Agency has a contract with the state to maintain water quality in the North Delta. And what you're telling us is that with sea level rise, are we going to tear that contract up? What's going to happen? Same thing with the laws, D1641 and other laws. You're making a lot of assumptions that I don't know if those will happen without a huge fight, especially the North Delta Water Agency contract, because it is a water quality contract. So anyway, just to throw those out, just to kind of give you some background information of what I was thinking on some of those issues.
Awesome. All right. Anna, go ahead.
Thank you. So, although it's very good that I hear Carrie saying that DWR is going to try to focus and learn more about water quality, it's kind of disappointing that hasn't something that hasn't already happened, seeing as how that's one of our biggest issues. As far as like staying in the box, it's really hard because although we're all pretending like this is our first go around with this project, as someone who's now on her third ride around the sun with the same project, I happen to know that there will be setback levees that will be across from the intakes that are greatly going to impact our neighbors, especially here on the Clarksburg side. I'm very concerned about flood. I'm very concerned about the idea of using current systems like sloughs and whatnot to take away the water that will come out of these tunnel holes. And I just want to say this because there's been a lot of talk about community benefit today. And everyone that I've ever talked to in the Delta, with the exception, I guess, of Jim, has said there is no price tag that anyone could put on their land and on their heritage and on the multi-generational farming activities that have happened out here. And so, although I think that may be a conversation that some may be willing to have, I'm not at a point where I think I'm willing to put a price tag on something that is invaluable and that should never be destroyed and should never be forsaken. And so I just want to put that out there because it feels a little bit insulting, the idea to try to put a price tag on someone's heritage, on someone's home, on the legacy of the Delta, on the towns in the Delta. And I really think that there should be a lot more outreach to communities like Cortland and Hood and Walnut Grove and these places that will be directly impacted. And although I know that you won't listen to me, I really don't like staying in that box because like the Delta, this project is not just contained into a certain circumference. This, just like the Delta, it's all connected. What you do in one part directly affects another part. And so it gets really hard to just do that because we all know that it is all connected and that there are other, impacts that are going to be happening that we cannot talk about today, but we actually know are ahead and will be discussed in future conversations. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our final speaker is Melissa Tayaba. Hi, Melissa.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
We can, yes.
All right. I'm sorry for missing the first opportunity to, but here I am. I just wanted to give you guys just a short update. So tribes still have been meeting. We had our last meeting and just a few details. The DCA and DWR, they have been doing some presentations for the tribal group just because you guys are the experts, we aren't. So you guys obviously can explain a lot of those details better than us. That's one thing. We are scheduling, our next meeting is actually scheduled for September 16th. And we're also scheduling an annual Delta Conveyance meeting on September 27th. DWR will be there, and we're also going to be inviting people statewide to that meeting. It'll be a virtual meeting. In the last, and just real quickly, in the last tribal meeting, I think there were just a few things that I wanted to bring up. As you know, this project will affect tribes tremendously. It'll have a very deep impact. It's obviously disturbing our natural resources, our sacred sites, and our gathering sites. So we know that this will have a huge impact for us. In the last meeting, tribes, once again, and I think this is just the biggest thing that we've been kind of screaming every meeting, and that's what are the impacts to the plant life, to the fish, and once again, water quality. We've been asking those same questions over and over. So this last meeting, tribes were really kind of just really needing that information. As you know, we've asked for information from Fish and Wildlife and all those other agencies that are involved. And then I don't want to forget the no project alternative. Tribes are really asking about that still. And so just wanted to remind you guys about that. And another thing that just happens every month is materials. We're still having an issue getting our materials so late because obviously we can't review it with our team in a timely manner and get the materials to everybody. As you guys know, those maps are super important. They're also very hard to print. And so we're just still kind of going over some of those details. But tribes are very, very worried of the impacts of how this is going to affect the environment, the plants, the fish, and one last thing. Oh, Stones Lake. Tribes really, really want to know information regarding Stones Lake Wildlife Refuge. They would like to know what the impacts to Stones Lakes is going to be because Obviously, however, whatever impacts Stones Lake is going to impact tribal cultural resources. So wanted to point that out also. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, Nasli, did you?
Oh, I think the only thing, and Melissa knows this. Melissa, I know that you're frustrated about the materials. We've explained we can't print the presentations materials before, and I know it's tough, but we are working kind of on a lot of the stuff right up until the meeting starts because of a lot of the feedback we get. But we are committed to providing all the materials to you before the TEC meetings, your tribal engagement material meetings. You know, everyone got their materials today before the meeting. I know that we also strive to get the materials out before that, but it is also difficult for us to be working right now, and mailing it is just taking longer these days. So I'm sorry that folks do not have the materials in hand, the extra copies that they request before the SEC meetings, but that's part of why we said we'd love to participate in the tribal engagement meetings, is to go over everything that happened to the TEC. And again, you get the printouts before those meetings. So that is the best that we can do, but I do want to sort of say that publicly because I think that we've been kind of bending over backwards to make sure that we are getting every printout you've asked for.
Hey, Nasli, can we at least print out the books for them and maybe make sure that they have them?
They're there. Yep.
Oh, they have them. Oh, okay, good.
It's just that the materials that come out to everybody that I email right before the meeting, which is when they become available, obviously don't get printed and delivered within the hour before the meeting.
Right.
It is our hope that we get the stuff out sooner, but frankly, with the nature of all the approvals that we have to go through and all the changes and whatnot, it's just not realistic. So I don't want to sort of keep promising something that we just don't manage to do.
Okay. Awesome.
We get the materials so late that obviously, you know, you can't review with your group very well if you're just waiting for them and don't have that much time. So that was it.
No, I understand that. And as I said, that's why we've made a commitment to participate fully in the tribal engagement committee meetings after our SEC meetings so that you get all the materials and then you get our staff to help review those materials if they weren't able to do it before the SEC or weren't able to download it during the SEC. Okay.
Awesome. All right, Sarah.
Yeah, I think we want to wind this up. I want to thank everybody for participating in this open forum. I appreciate the frustration that we all feel in terms of being inside of a box. I'm very much of a generalist and have taught university and all sorts of levels and been in research, and I like to see connections. The one thing I think that this whole process has done for us, and basically it kind of hands it off to Carrie and her group, and they have to pull it apart and deal with it as they can. But the interconnectedness of all of these things, I think it's probably made all of us so very aware of the interconnectedness of the tribes and the ag and the voting and not just, as I think was also brought up today, the outward going ripples from the immediate area into other regions. So, but thank you. I think it's extremely valuable, if frustrating that we're trying to stay focused as much as possible, but we will prevail. Okay, so we should at this point move on to the next portion, which is 4B, and that's the DWR updates. And so, Carrie, would you take it away? You're going to be giving us an update on the CEQA process, I believe.
Sure. And so, Jasmine, I think you're going to pull up the slides for me.
Yes, just one.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Here we go.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So this is my monthly environmental review process update, where I highlight where we are in the environmental process. So just as an overview, again, we published the scoping summary report. As I mentioned during some of the discussion in the roundtable, we're working on identifying additional outreach plans on the end of that first line. And we've also started a little bit into line 2 with the identifying the alternatives. So I just wanted to provide an overview as we walk through the rest of this of where we are in this process, which is still pretty early. So if we can move to the next slide. Okay, so a couple of updates on where things are. On the CEQA side, we published the scoping summary report, and really right now we're working on the draft environmental impact report. So we're working on collecting information for affected environment, we're working on establishing methodologies and getting models ready to use. For the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, the United States Army Corps of Engineers released a notice of intent to prepare an environmental impact statement. They released that on August 20th, and scoping continues until October 20th. And they're also working on a public notice for the 404 application review. And so that is also available for review on their website. And then for soil investigations, as we've discussed before, the CEQA documentation that's required for soil investigations has been adopted. And so that allows work to begin on publicly owned sites this fall. And there is additional work that's going on right now that's under prior environmental compliance. And so there are some soil investigation activities that are currently ongoing, but we have not yet started the soil investigations under the recent initial study and mitigated negative declarations. And then Jasmine, can you go to the next slide? And one thing that people may have seen that it came out in one of the e-blasts recently is that we have released an updated schedule very recently. And this reflects a couple of things that have been going on in preparation of the environmental document. So one of them is that we found that we need to do some refinements to the models that we've identified to use so that they're ready for our project. And that has caused a bit of a delay on the admin draft side. And then the other thing that's changed here is that we've incorporated the Corps' review process into our internal review processes before release of the public draft. And they have a bit more involved review process, and we want to make sure that we keep both of those documents together to the extent possible as we move through these processes. We do think that we're going to be preparing separate environmental impact reports and an environmental impact statement, although that is still under discussion. So that means that we want to try to keep the reviews of those, the public review aligned. So we have stretched out that period internally where we're reviewing the admin draft and working to prepare the public draft. So that's reflected some changes in this schedule. You guys have seen an earlier version of this, but this reflects the changes. And Catherine, maybe you can talk for a second about how this affects the DCA schedule as well.
Right. So the delays, we owe you the engineering reports that go into your administrative draft document, which according to this schedule is going to be done mid-2021. So we plan on having our documents to you for your review and comment, including the Bethany alternative in February of 2021. But we'll be, you know, as we've done before, giving you pieces of information along the way as we produce it so that you can get you know, not necessarily a head start, but at least an early look at some of the critical information.
Okay, and so I think last slide, Jasmine, is just the regular ways to stay informed. And I think I've mentioned this before, but our e-blasts are a really good way of keeping up to date. We had one go out last week that had a number of these pieces of information. And so if you're not on that e-blast list, I'd highly recommend signing up. I think that's it for our quick update today.
Great. Thank you very much, Carrie. Okay, so then we're going to be moving on to basically, as I mentioned, 4C and D. As we mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, it's critical that the SEC see how their work is impacting, and this was presented also to the board of last week. And we'll look at the impact on the design and engineering from this project. And so once again, Catherine, would you introduce the staff presentation for item 4C and 4D on the agenda?
Yeah, Phil Ryan's going to do these next two presentations, and as you all know, engineering manager for the DCA. So Phil, take it away.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be back. Make sure that this slide advances on my end. So I hope for everybody it moved to the summary. Did it?
Moved on my end.
All right, good. I just want to make sure we made the switch between Jasmine and I. Okay, this first section here, I'm going to go over three sections, but the first one is summary of some intake changes we've made. we're going to review the defined intake site for capacity options, the revised sedimentation basin layout that facilitates an on-site earth balance, and then the revised configuration and constructability methodologies for the intakes in the river themselves. So the first one, this kind of builds on some of the things that, as Carrie identified either the last month or the month before, how we were no longer going to use intake 2 unless we had a 7,500 CFS option. So this slide helps summarize all of that, where we originally had the 3 sites and we had different combinations of them that we're going to use, and they've defined more specifically where the intakes would be used. So you can see that intake 5 is involved in all of the options between 3,000 and 7,500 CFS capacity. And intake 2 is only involved in the 7,500 one, and in that case, it's basically a half-size intake compared to the main 3,000 CFS capacity. And then intake 3 comes into play for everything above the smallest capacity. And given that intake 3 is the deepest and the shortest structure, once it comes into play, it stays at the full capacity the whole time. So what do we get from all this? Well, by not using intake 2, we've reduced the length of haul. The haul road up from Lambert, that has implications for Stone Lake's disturbance, and basically disturbance to the community just for the number of trucks moving through Hood. Either the reduction of intake 2 or its elimination, depending on the capacity, clearly minimizes noise and impacts to Clarksburg, and then sort of in the direction behind it towards Elk Grove there. Like I mentioned, using the deeper intakes 3 and 5 promotes the smallest, shortest in-river intake footprint. And because intake 5 can be reached from the Twin Cities shaft, and intake 5 would be included in all the different options, then the Lambert maintenance shaft is not required because we can reach it. If we were trying to reach intake 3 from, say, Twin Cities shaft, we would have had to have that maintenance shaft. So that's an overall reduction in the overall footprint of the project as well. So moving on to the second change, we revised the sedimentation basin layout for an on-site earth balance. You can see the yellow line there. That's the approximate shape that we showed you clear back in January when we first introduced the intakes, before we'd had this all worked out completely. And now we have laid out the intakes to use the excavation from the sedimentation basins to balance, so that we can build all the embankments along the river and around the embankment themselves with on-site dirt. So what is this really, the huge benefit for this is this literally eliminates thousands of truck trips and the associated emissions. And all of those trucks would have traveled on the haul road, again, along the Stone Lakes area. So it literally cuts thousands of trucks out of the traffic along Stone Lakes. The overall impact to the site is really minimal, because we were basically making better use of the overall construction footprint. Now the permanent footprint then ends up taking up a little bit more of the construction footprint, and they still fit pretty much in the same footprints that we've been showing all along. Now we do recognize that they are bigger, and they're slightly bigger than they would need to be just for settling sediment in order to make the dirt balance. And we have some methods we're looking at to help reduce that, and those are things that will be explored. They're key with working with the Corps of Engineers to make sure that we never sacrifice flood control for any reason. And as we work with those issues and the maintenance of traffic on the river road, there may be opportunities to help shrink this down. It'll probably never get back to where it was, but we're hoping that this is the largest footprint, and that in the future, the intakes could potentially reduce in size. Now, sort of the piece de resistance is the revised configuration and construction methodologies. And this is the intake structures themselves out in the river. So I kind of want to bring everybody back. Remember, the river flows along in front. So the original plan is up in the left. And the current plan is down the right. They're pretty similar. There's not really, the current plan shows less screens. It's just because the structure and the rendering got cut in a different spot. There's still the same number of screens along there. But the river would flow along in front. This shelf underneath the T-screen shown is close to the bottom of the river. The top deck is at the top of the levee, and then the pipes behind it would lead into the sedimentation basins. So, you know, we've been talking to you about this, about the construction with sheet piles. So the first change what I want to point out is the original plan, you can see all the sheet piles around. They're highlighted in the purple there. They go around the back. You can see the back wall, and they surround the entire intake with sheet pile. And because this was built with sheet pile, it's a very strong system. It actually includes these H piles we call king piles in a system with the sheet piles, and the front wall helps the back wall all to resist the loads from the levee behind it and all that. And those are the source of a lot of the impact pile driving we were discussing. And also the size of the intake then reflects the number of piers underneath. So what I'm pleased to be able to say, you know, we've heard the concern about noise and even the duration of that noise and the kind of noise that we would have. So we've looked at this really strongly, and we've come up with an optimized way to do this, where we're going to replace the back wall. Instead of a sheet pile wall with the heavy king piles and the sheets, we're going to put a deep mechanically mixed, it's a, you know, cement soil cutting wall with other kinds of reinforcement in it that can be constructed without any pile driving that requires impact. Any reinforcement in it, it gets reinforced with big I-beams. They get vibrated into place. And by doing that, that's a very strong wall. The front wall now is not, the back wall is not dependent on the front wall to help hold it up. So we're able to reduce the gauge or the thickness, heaviness, if you will, of all of the piles around the intakes. And that way we believe that, other than, you know, our estimate right now is only about 10% of the depth of these piles will have to be driven. The rest can be vibrated into place. So this is a huge reduction in the amount of noise, and actually it'll reduce the duration of it and the whole thing. So this is I think a huge benefit for people who live around these things. Not that there won't be any noise, but we've substantially reduced it. I would say the amount of pile driving between the original and current plan is probably on the order of about 20% of what it was planned to be. So another configuration, this affects the T-screens, but not so much the vertical plate screens. But the T-screen, the original size of the structure, everything was on the riverside for controlling the flows. And you can see that the width of the structure there has to be supported by the piers underneath it. So the new plan is a smaller box, as you can see there. So there's less piers. Now these piers aren't driven. They're a casing is vibrated into place, and they're drilled piers, which is basically a concrete pier. But again, they take you know, a lot of time out there on the river to construct. So by moving some of the control valves to the boxes, you can kind of see in the shadow there on the right underneath the current plan box, we're able to make that structure smaller and reduce, again, the workload required on the river, and again, help the construction schedule. Yeah. So what do we get from all this? The benefits, you know, I mean, we clearly have fewer sheet piles. We have a reduced size of the in-river structure for the T-screens with the fewer support piles. All of this, I mean, the huge benefit here is the faster installation and the net less noise. Now, because of the timing of the, you know, we have to work only in the summer for the fish windows, it really takes a whole summer season away. It only affects the overall construction by 6 months because of that, but still it does take but we should be able to get the entire cofferdam in that first summer season instead of where we were looking at having to do it over 2 seasons. And, you know, you'd think, well, that would reduce a whole year, but it only really reduces about 6 months. But that 6 months is definitely everything we can do to shorten the schedule on these things for everybody who's going to be impacted by that work. So then moving on, we have gone back through the traffic information we showed you at the May meeting, you know, was based on some preliminary data. And now that we've fine-tuned the central and east corridor information, you know, and the layout of all the facilities better, we're able to fine-tune the traffic. And we made a really strong effort to reduce the traffic even further than some of the things we had already talked about. So I'm going to show you 5 representative areas here. And Catherine mentioned histograms. These are the histograms just for these 5 areas. And I think a whole book of them will be provided to you when they're all finished. So let's start off. I mean, I know one mention was to focus a little bit more on Staten Island. Well, this is a good opportunity to take a look at Staten Island. You can see that before we had almost 2,500 trucks a month for 3 months hauling material out there. That was a total truck trips just for that earth pad around the shaft of about 11,000 trucks. So what we've done, and Graham showed you this at either last meeting or 2 meetings ago, where we reduced the size, the height of the pads and the size of the pads to, you know, reflect what was, you know, absolutely needed and to help with this actual situation. You can see the blue lines here. The other thing that we didn't talk about with Graham at that time is we also looked long and hard about when the deliveries are now scheduled as needed instead of just moving all the dirt there. So the dirt will arrive as it gets compacted and build these pads in conjunction with the ground improvement. So we've spread it out. So now we're down to less than, say, 750 trucks a month, which is, you know, approximately less than a third of what was the travel that was going to be on those roads before. And you can see that the truck trips over in the bottom bullet there are, you know, approximately half of what was originally planned. And this is all based on that reduction in pad height.
And Phil, that affects all of the shafts.
Yeah,
yeah,
they're not all exactly the same because the shaft pad volumes are different. But yeah, the same issue. I mean, this is actually another example of it here. Now the schedule has progressed as well. So you can see that the deliveries you see on the left where was pad hauls, and you can see they got as high as 5,000. That's because there's 3 pads in this particular set of orange bars there for Mandeville, Bacon, and the Byron track shafts that were all going to be traveling on Highway 4. And, you know, we've made some adjustments to the schedule too. That's why there's a shift. But we, you know, as we went over with you before, we've eliminated the Byron track shaft completely. And so then we can see that the same kind of effect takes place for the Bacon and Mandeville shafts, which are the blue areas shown to the right there. And again, this is, you know, again, roughly a 50% reduction in truck traffic that needs to go. Basically for these, it gets to Holt where it goes off-road over towards Bacon Island. And then State Route, that was for the central alignment with the Bacon and Mandeville shaft. So this is on the eastern alignment, the State Route 4. So basically what was in here before was the support for the Victoria Island shaft and excuse me, I lost my train of thought here, and Upper Jones, or and the Lower Roberts shaft launch pad site. Now the Lower Roberts shaft, we weren't hauling material to the Lower Roberts shaft because that was going to be excavated on site. You can see the 2 peaks for we've eliminated the Victoria Island shaft, and there's a smaller peak at the beginning here that represents the material for taking it to Upper Jones. Now this one doesn't look quite the same, is because the launch shaft on Lower Roberts is also included here. But when we eliminated and we sharpened our pencil on all this, elimination of the barge landing at Lower Roberts and the adjustment of our hauling, you know, to make sure we're being efficient with the hauling of materials, the sand for grouting the tunnel now would come in by truck. That's why you see a longer little tail of the little blue things there. That's mainly the sand support at the Lower Roberts shaft site. But again, the major truck trips associated with the project were reduced substantially by reducing the size of the shaft pads here. It's kind of the same effect. So this one, because of the change in the hauling of sand, it spreads it way out, but the truck traffic is roughly the same. And here's kind of the big one. And what I want you to take really a good look at on this one is the scale on the side. You see we go up to 2,500 with this thing, but these truck trips used to go up to 20,000. I mean, that's 10 times higher than this chart here. So some of these truck trips in the beginning, getting out on the Byron Highway, are really off the charts. And that was for hauling that material from the south side of the Byron Highway. We were excavating for the South Delta conveyance facilities up to the north side to be used for constructing the southern forebay. But, you know, as we looked at that and with the complications with the heavy traffic on Byron Highway, we put the bridge in at North Bruns Way to cross over the Byron Highway. You can see the impact that that whole thing had there on this whole southern complex, because now all of the inner project transfers back and forth between the project on the south side of the Byron Highway and projects on the north side of the Byron Highway no longer go out on the public roads. They all stay on site except for North Bruns itself. So the Byron Highway's traffic impacts were severely reduced in this process. So then the last one, which is a little bit different than the others, it has some of the aspects of both. This is the Bolden Island, and again, the old the stuff in May in orange. You can see the large number of trips there for building the big launch shaft pad. That again, those were spread out over a fair amount of time because of the size of that pad and the whole thing. And the pad's been reduced, so that the truck trips have been reduced, you know, similar to the other shaft pads. It is a larger pad though, that's why it's not quite as dramatic as some of the others, but it is a pretty substantial reduction. But as you'll recall, we made the choice to not bring the concrete tunnel liner segments to Bolden Island by barge when we eliminated the barge landing, because we were going to make the effort to widen Highway 12 and the bridge over Potato Slough. So now by using the bridge over Potato Slough, there's more truck trips off to the right, bringing all the segments and all the other tunnel support materials in there, when it used to just be the basic support materials instead of the segments added on. But even with that increased traffic, you know, you see the note there that it is still an improvement in the level of service on Highway 12 in the area we're going to be using, because the change to 4 lanes is just such a dramatic improvement for Highway 12 in this area that even our traffic doesn't use up the additional capacity that's provided by that. So kind of a summary, you know, throughout the Delta, we've reduced the shaft diameter and pad heights to reduce and spread out those deliveries, you know, to bring it there when it's needed and get that truck trips. And you saw, you know, they're roughly, you know, in the 60-ish% of what they used to be. And up above, we've increased the size of the said basins at the intake so that we can get rid of tens of thousands of trucks for hauling material to the intakes to build those basins. Highway 12, like I mentioned, expanding to 4 lanes to facilitate that increased truck traffic. And then on Highway 4, eliminating shaft on each the central and the east, and reduce the borrow material transport, severely reduces the peaks of the traffic on Highway 4 and the totals in many cases. then Byron Highway, maximizing use of rail transport, which we talked to you about before, but also combining that with this new bridge over the highway has severely reduced our traffic impact on the Byron Highway. Now, I'll mention that's great for the people who use the Byron Highway, but the Byron Highway is such a crowded thing. It's also great for the project to help speed up construction and, you know, the delays in traffic that could have been associated with that. So you can see on the right, the total loaded number of trucks based on this analysis has gone down quite a bit. It's gone down more on the eastern because on central we added the hauling of the segments back into the mix. So the Bethany alternative, we've kind of, you know, tickled you with some information about it. So I'm going to help. We are still in the process of developing this. I'm going to kind of show you where we're at. We're still at a very preliminary basis on it, but we have some basic configuration information we can share with you. So this first slide here, these are the alternatives that DWR has assigned for the DCA to develop to support their work. And as you'll recall, oops, look at that. I moved my mouse and it flashed everything, but up in the top where the intakes are, the intakes in the North Tunnel area are common to everybody. And then as you're certainly familiar with the central and east alignments down the central portion of the Delta and closer over to I-5 for the eastern, and then coming back together for the southern complex and, you know, the deliveries into the State Water Project. And you can see how the Bethany alternative now fits in. It's really an extension or a modification to the lower end of the eastern corridor. You can see it takes off there at the Lower Roberts shaft and extends down to Bethany. So let's dive in a little deeper on that. So let's start with the existing system. You can see Clifton Court Forebay there in the middle picture. And the water is brought through the Delta, flows into Clifton Court Forebay, and then it flows out of the Forebay. At the top of the blue line there is where the Skinner Fish Facility is, so that's the fish screens. And it flows down the canal to the white box, and the white box is the Banks Pump Station, where it's lifted. The very first piece of that next blue line, the little straight section, those are a bunch of large diameter parallel pipes that go up the hill, and then they feed a canal that runs the rest of that blue line into Bethany Reservoir there. That looks like it got off a little. You can kind of see the canal off a little bit off to the right of the blue line, so something shifted there. But anyway, you get the picture of how the existing system flows into Clifton Court, is lifted up into Bethany, and then it leaves Bethany. You can see the California Aqueduct leaving the picture there and headed on down south. So our project, originally, the central and east, as you recall, they came in, fed the southern forebay, and we fed the California Aqueduct downstream of the fish facility, but upstream of the pump station. So our project was still dependent on the existing pumping plant to lift it up into the system for further flows downstream. Now, conversely to that, this is the Bethany alternative. So in this particular case, everything you saw from Central and Eastern would go away, and these would be the general footprint, where we'd come down from the Lower Roberts shaft at the top. There's two new shaft sites, one on Upper Jones and one on Union Island. And then this shaft just south of the Byron Highway there, which would be the other change in this is we wouldn't drive a tunnel from the south end. The tunnel would be driven from Lower Roberts. So it'd be a dual drive shaft. So there's no tunnel driving, operation in the south end, just a reception down there. And then that retrieval shaft we're also going to use as a surge basin. So you imagine all this, because at that same location, we would pump out of the tunnel into these other two lines you see are pipelines that go up to Bethany Reservoir. So there's a break in the system where it flows from the intakes by gravity down to this shaft, and then it gets pumped out. And so the reason that there's a surge basin there, we had the same thing on the south and central, except for when like there's a power failure and all this flow is coming in the tunnel at the pump station. In the past, it flowed up and overflowed into the southern forebay. Well, we don't have a southern forebay anymore. So now we're going to put a basin to take that flow up and down. So this is what I mean by that. Tunnel comes in from the left. There's the reception shaft in the middle, and the flow would feed the pumping plant. But in the event that the pumping plant failed, all this water's coming at you, and it would just go up and down in the surge basin. Now, this surge basin is nowhere near the size of the southern forebay. It's only, right now, it's very preliminary size, but we're talking, 15-ish acres for this surge basin instead of the 900 or more that were in the southern forebay. That sizing is ongoing right now. And then the pumping plant then would pump into buried pipelines, I like to call them aqueducts, that would pump up into Bethany Reservoir like I showed you, and then discharge down the California aqueduct. So what are some of the key benefits with the Bethany option? Well, it eliminates the need for the balancing reservoir. Like we mentioned, that the site that we're removing there is going to be approximately 1,300 acres of impact. Now, there's not to say there's no impact. I mean, we're going to be building a pumping plant and the surge basin over there south of the Byron Highway, but I think we're talking in the order of 100-ish acres versus 1,000-ish acres. We haven't laid all that facilities out, so I can't tell you precisely, but it's not the same. It's an order of magnitude less site impact. Then the discharge pipelines, they connect up to the existing state water project in Bethany Reservoir, which is downstream of the Banks pumping station. So that provides independence of the new system from the existing system. So that independence is a great thing for the project goals of, resiliency, supporting the flexibility of operations, and it also allows the state to more easily take the Banks pump station or Clifton Court forebay out of service for any kind of maintenance or repair. I mean, those facilities were built a long time ago, and they're clearly going to need maintenance and repair as time goes by, and this will allow for uninterrupted deliveries of flow during that time. So obviously these projects don't come without any issues. All projects have a certain amount of issues. One of the key issues is the discharge pipelines need to be considering a bunch of conservation easements. This is land set aside as mitigation for other projects. And you can see the pink areas there are areas that have already been set aside. And there's a purple area is an area that is potentially going to be set aside pretty soon. So you can see that there's not a great deal of the ability to get through here. So you might ask, I mean, most of the pipelines went to the downstream end. Why is this a big deal? But we also want to keep the water quality in Bethany Reservoir at a high level. So there's a certain amount of flow through the reservoir that are required if the Banks pumping plant isn't pumping, to make sure we get flow through the reservoir. So at least one of our aqueducts, that's why you saw two lines headed up to Bethany. One of them needs to cut through that road right away between the easements and get up to the reservoir on that one end, and the remainder will go in on the south end. Some other issues then is without the southern forebay, which we've been talking about for a long time, where we were using up the RTM, a big chunk of the RTM from the tunnel construction. We have very little project need for the RTM, some of the shaft pads and that kind of thing. So we're working on developing a new strategy for managing the RTM. That's in progress now. And right now we have very little geotechnical data. We haven't drilled any holes out here yet. We've looked at existing data, and what we do know indicates that the area contains, pretty weak and fractured rock. And, for pipelines, this might be, it makes the excavation not so great, but it's really good trench conditions for pipelines. So some of the geotechnical conditions are a little more solid, but some alternatives we looked at considered, tunneling and other options, and it'll make those a little bit more challenging for some of the pipeline routes and the things that get up into the rock. And that's pretty much the stuff from the pumping plant up to the reservoir. So that completes my summary of 3 items. And I don't know if we want to take any questions or...
Okay. Well, then do we have public comment? It looks like we're going for public comment on item number 4.
Well, this is a different item.
Go
Sarah.
back.
Sorry, I punched ahead. I should have stayed here.
Yeah, there you go. So I think it's questions on any of the presentation materials from there. Oh, yeah. So SEC questions.
Are there any clarifying questions? I see David Glassky's up. Go ahead, David.
So a few different questions here. There's a big size difference between the old forebay that you had and the Bethany Reservoir. So this thing's going to be operating, it's like something's changed, right? It's going to operate and function a lot differently than you would if you had a forebay.
Yeah, a lot. Remember, we were balancing a 6,000 CFS delivery on the old project with the Banks pumping plant that has an 11,000 CFS capacity, and we were sharing, as Carrie described in her alternatives thing a few weeks ago, that was a dual conveyance. This one is still potentially dual conveyance, but they're not using the same facilities to accomplish that dual conveyance. I don't know, Carrie, if you described this one as dual conveyance or not, but David, we're not dependent on matching our flows with any South Delta flows and with the operation of the Banks pumping plant. We only have one pumping plant here. And if you'll recall, we had no forebay between our pumping plant and the tunnel before. And the only reason we need this basin is before, when we had a surge, we had it set up that would spill into our forebay. Well, now we don't have that forebay, so we have this surge basin to absorb the surge, but we would just pump all of the flow that came to us into Bethany. So we don't need a forebay for this configuration. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, but it's that whole balance.
Did the forebay before have any, was there storage benefit for being able to store water?
The storage benefit of the previous forebay was for timing of use, right? So that we could use both systems concurrently while not having to stop the new facilities operation. We can still use the south facilities. So it wasn't storage that people think of. It's not like, Shasta Lake or something that stores something all winter to benefit you later. It was like 12 hours worth of storage kind of thing. It was what we call operational storage.
Yeah, let me just chime in. It's that forebay was needed to balance allowing the tunnel to continuously flow at 6,000 CFS while letting the Banks pump station make whatever deliveries it needed to do. So you needed some balancing in there for operational. Here, you don't need the balancing because you can run at 6,000 CFS continuously and you can discharge into Bethany Reservoir and there's nothing to balance it against. You weren't having a pump station pumping to another pump station.
But Bethany doesn't look to be too big, so you're probably having to balance with how much you can take from the tunnel versus how much you can take from the delta, right?
Yeah, but Bethany can discharge continuously downstream, where the tunnel, and again,
what's the discharge of Bethany in CFS?
It's just over 10,000.
Okay. So the last comment I have is, you've been hearing me probably for months with my desire to be able to flush the South Delta, and with that water sitting there in the forebay, it's easily accessible. So this eliminates that as a possibility. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not sure how effective the South forebay was for helping you flush the South Delta to start with, though. I'm not sure the situation really.
I could argue that it could be pretty helpful.
Okay.
So I was down, I was looking at I was I had my boat in the middle of your flow at Bullfrog Landing. It's a pretty darn good flow. And I would imagine you could get some flow out of those 4 bays too. So anyways, okay, those are my questions.
All right. Douglas.
Hi, okay. I have a question about maintenance shafts. Last summer, I saw your material that says that now you have eliminated the Lambert maintenance shaft. And I think that you also have eliminated Granville track shaft also.
Yeah, so Douglas, we didn't eliminate the Glenville track shaft. We moved it onto the Twin Cities launch site. So we're calling it the Twin Cities shaft now. So it was moved over to consolidate the operations on the other side of the freeway on a site we were already pretty much occupying, got us completely out of the boundary of the Stone Lakes reserve. And, you know, it was a benefit for everybody. We consolidated the work, got out of Stone Lakes, and we no longer had to deal with building bridges across I-5 and that kind of thing. So that was a good move, and that definitely happened. So again, it didn't get eliminated; it got moved. So there is no Glanville shaft; it's the Twin Cities shaft now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, good clarifying question. Anna.
Thank you. So when you were on slide 3 and you were talking about noise reduction, you said that the elimination of intake 2 reduced the noise for Clarksburg and Elk Grove. Does that mean, how loud are these pile drivers if people can hear it all the way in Elk Grove? That's pretty far distance from us. And then regarding that Twin Cities shaft, I don't think that the person who owns the land that you intend to put that shaft on would see that as advantageous.
Yeah, I can't really comment on the Twin Cities shaft issue, Anna, but I'm trying to get back to so I don't know if you remember, but a long time ago, we showed you a sound pressure level map that had these circles that emanated out of the intakes as to where you would hear different levels. So that was the sound pressure levels that were coming from pile driving. And as they're sort of indiscriminate of, you know, what direction you go, right? They go out equally in all directions. So you can see at intake 2, the subdivisions from Elk Grove are still, you know, within the realm of hearing those. So that's why I mentioned Elk Grove. Clarksburg's obviously closer, so that it would have been louder in Clarksburg. So I don't remember the exact decibel levels that were in Clarksburg, but we did have that on a slide back, I don't know, January, February. We could resurrect that at some point if you wanted to look at it.
Because, Phil, it would be very useful for our purposes versus having to go back and dig out that study. It would be very helpful if you could incorporate that onto the slides that you're presenting currently, sort of condense the information so that we can understand. Someone's dog is barking. So that would be very helpful for future slides. It's just sort of, if we're going to talk about noise, let's talk about it in a complete way where we include the information that we were given in the past, because that's very confusing and actually kind of disturbing, the idea that the noise is that loud. And it would be nice to have a refresher on exactly what you think the decibel capacity could be for those pile driving to remind us all.
Yeah. So
thank you, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough, Anna. I mean, we could easily have done that. We didn't think of it. But the sound pressure levels that we showed you were essentially unmitigated. So we can show you the levels that, you know, published values say that pile drivers. But one of the intents of the program is to conduct a test pile program literally at one of these intake sites once we have that sort of definition to the project. And the idea with those test pile programs is to test different ways to reduce the sound by, you know, a whole bunch of different methods of how to do that. And so I think down the road, you know, the full story about noise is going to take some time to really be able to be complete with. But I appreciate what you said. You know.
And it is one of our biggest concerns. So the more complete of a idea, and I apologize, that's the fire alarm behind me now. The more complete that you can help us understand, the better, because it is one of the major topics that are of concern of people, of residents here in the Delta.
Yeah, and Anna, can I, Phil, what we need really is some geotech data here so that we can see how deep the different strata are, so that we can see how far we can vibratorily install these sheet piles. So there's still, what we're trying to do is show that we've looked at this. We presented the sound levels back in February. They're available on the site. And we went back and looked at it. We know that the techniques that we're proposing are quieter. But before we do any more of the acoustic work on this, we really want to wait till we get the imminent geotechnical data, because that'll really help us determine how well these methods work for these soil conditions. So it's definitely a topic that we'll get back to.
We have substantially reduced, I mean, our geotechs are estimated we may only have to hit these 10% of their length when we used to have to hit them roughly half their length. So that alone is only 20% what we had before. And we're only, you know, about half of the piles because we've gotten rid of the back wall completely. So we have, I mean, this is a serious reduction in impact driving of piles at these intakes. Serious, I mean, significant.
And I can appreciate that, but when they're doing the work on the Petersville Bridge where they're having to do pile driving for the earthquake retrofit, you can hear it in Clarksburg. So that's why we're concerned, is that the acoustics in the Delta are different than they are in other places. And so something that seems minor on a spreadsheet will probably not be minor in the actual environment of the Delta.
Right, but that's exactly what Phil's trying to tell you is that we've reduced the amount of impact driving that we need to do on this with this redesign here. And as soon as we get some additional data on the soil conditions, as I said, we can come back and do more of this acoustic analysis.
All right. So Mike Moran, go ahead.
Hey, Phil, thanks a lot for this. Could you please bring up the slide that has that Bethany alignment down by Clifton Court? I just want to see the route of that and where those shafts are.
Okay, I will show you that, Mike, but I want to tell you that we are still doing sighting on this.
Oh, okay, well, just
so everything you see is kind of tentative.
Right.
So I got all these builds to go through. Okay, so there you go. So the Lower Roberts is the same as East. Mm-hmm. And then the one on Upper Jones is very close to where it used to be. Now there's one on Union Island. This the third one down. That's new. We never had one on Union Island before.
Okay.
And then the last one is just south of the Byron Highway to the I guess east of Mountain House Road.
Yeah. Okay, that's very helpful. So the alignment though looks like it goes, am I missing this? Is it going underneath the Jones plant? Is that right? Or anywhere near?
No, the Jones pumping plant is the end of, you see the bottom white dot.
There we go.
I wonder, can you guys see my arrow?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so this is the Jones pumping plant right here.
Okay, yeah. So
and this is the Tracy fish, the Tracy fish handling facility here, you know, and at a more blown up, I mean, this thing's probably, you know, at this scale, it's way wider than it really is.
Okay.
But we are not underneath anything. Mm-hmm. You know, we're not underneath the the state's gates. We're not underneath the bureau's facilities. We're not under anybody's houses, you know, any of that.
Okay. Okay, I just needed to see that. Thanks so much.
Awesome. All right. I think that's it. Sarah?
Okay, then let's move on. Okay,
So I'm
we
going to
are
stop
now
sharing,
in the area.
Jasmine.
Oh, I'm sorry, Phil, did you have something else to say?
No, I was just telling Jasmine I'm stopping sharing.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Phil. That was really good. Now we're going to have some public comment on all the reports in item 4. So could you take it away, handling public comment, please?
Sure. We have 4 people who have provided submitted slips or digital slips with regard to their desire to speak. I'm going to name them all right now so that you guys can be prepared. Emily Papalardo, Mary Chambers, Ocean Reserve, and Gia Moreno. And we will start with Emily Papalardo. You get 3 minutes. We do have, I want to note that some people really like the clock up. Other people don't like the clock up. The reason we put it up is so that it can be a tool for you to be able to gauge whether you want to go faster, slower, or edit yourself. So please take it in that good way. We're just trying to, you know, be supportive and provide you with tools. So with that,
it fair.
I'm sorry?
It also makes it fair for everybody.
Right. All right. So Emily, if you're ready, go ahead.
Hi, you can all hear me, right?
We can, yes.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing public comment on this item. I'm commenting mostly on the noise impacts of the pile driving. And during the presentation, I had a couple of questions. I wonder how much guarantee you have that you can use a vibratory hammer on the sheet piles. In my experience, I've done some dock permits and we've always spec'd a vibratory hammer, but when it came down to it, we had to use an impact hammer to get through the riprap. So to reflect on what Anna said, that pile driving at the Paintersville Bridge, I actually took a video of it. I don't think it would make any difference now to hear that through this computer system, but we're about a mile away from that, and it was very loud. And so where I am is it's a private boat resort, and I can't imagine one summer of that happening all day, every day with, you know, all our tenants. I don't know if they'll stay. And so it's one of the impacts that we are really concerned with. It's hard enough to run a marina in the Delta, but to have noise impacts on top of that makes it even more hard, I think, to survive. So, so I really wanted to know, it's hard to look through all your old materials to understand what you were talking about with the duration of the pile driving and the construction schedule. It was hard to see it. Can you do all the pile driving in one season, as in one summer for both intakes, or is it just one intake? So major concern there with noise. I do, and then I just non-agenda, I guess, is traffic. I do like seeing the haul routes off the levee roads. There's a lot of traffic during harvest in the summer here in the North Delta. So if you can stay off those roads and especially avoid the bridges, you're gonna really reduce impacts to farming and reduce impacts to the project itself, because it's very hard to get across the bridges and get around when one's out of service. So that's basically all I have. I really want to encourage you to try to minimize noise as much as possible using whatever buffers that you can, so that everyone can kind of not go insane with pile driving all summer. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. All right, Mary Chambers, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for opening this up to comment. I'd like to comment on the proposed Delta Tunnel. Is this the right time to do that?
If you could speak to the items in item 4, that would work.
Well, I'm calling in to express my concern about the environmental impacts of the Delta Tunnel. I'm very concerned about the environmental impacts of the tunnel on the fish and bird populations in the Delta and how it will be really destructive to those habitats and ecosystems. And I think that the proposed alternatives for the environmental review process don't offer a broad enough set of alternatives. They are really very limited in their scope and don't look at how more local and diversified solutions could provide a lot of improvement in the water availability. And I'd like to see alternatives provided that take into account the potential of things like increasing agricultural water use efficiency. My background is in agriculture, and I think that solutions like drip irrigation, better planning for crops, making sure that there's an option to put less suitable land to rest during drier years or convert that land to ecologically restored habitats, solar farms, et cetera, is really important. And then there's other solutions like improved urban water use efficiency, recycling municipal water, capturing rainwater and stormwater, and having improved groundwater conservation policies that I think would make these tunnel solution not necessary and would avoid all the ecological destruction that would happen under a tunnel solution. I didn't use up the full 3 minutes, but that's the end of my comments. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay. I'm going off a different list. My apologies. Let me update the folks who I have. I do have Stephen Rosenblum on my list for agenda item 4. I also have OSHA Reserve on my list for item 4. So my apologies. So let's see. Let's go with, let's see, hold on just one moment. Why don't we, because I want to make sure that people are ready when we call them. We'll go with with OSHA Reserve next, and then Gia Moreno. I think Gia, you were on this list as well. Excuse me. Gia, OSHA, and then we'll go back to Stephen. So my apologies, Stephen. Go ahead, OSHA, go ahead and start.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Providing comments today on behalf of local agencies of the North Delta, and we continue to be concerned about the tunnel project. And also, you know, I think there's been some discussion of improvements around the edges to this design, which obviously the DCA wants to emphasize, but I think the critical aspects of the tunnel project that harm the Delta and the Delta communities are still very much in place and have not been changed. And a lot of those things actually aren't even up for discussion in this group. With respect to the environmental review update provided by DWR, there was a reference to the EIS being prepared under the auspices of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I'm very concerned about whether there will be a robust public process possible with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I would encourage DWR and to make sure that that happens to the extent it can within the COVID issues that we're dealing with, because I can say from past experience that Army Corps public processes have not typically been very robust, and having the Army Corps in the lead is concerning. In addition, it looks like, according to the notice of intent that was released by the Army Corps is saying that the EIS will only address project construction, not project operation. There's many legal problems with that approach, and obviously operation of the project is something that needs to be reviewed together with construction. So I think possibly in a future update that should be addressed in this setting or elsewhere, about how operation of the project will be reviewed under NEPA, because obviously that needs to be done. In addition, I think I have a concern about the Bethany Reservoir. I think there's a concern that it could be another step toward abandonment of the Delta conveyance in the way that it's set up right now, the through Delta conveyance. And if the South Delta is going to be skipped over in the Bethany alternative, and it doesn't matter what's happening in the South Delta anymore, I think that is a further concern for communities that may be reliant on water in those areas. That also, like was mentioned with respect to North Delta Water Agency, there are obligations, legal and through the contracts and also through the laws and the water quality control plan to maintain water quality. And that needs to be done irrespective of whether a tunnel is built and whether the Bethany alternative, for instance, was adopted. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, Gia Moreno, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to address some concerns. One, just like with Anna and Emily about the pile driving. I haven't been out there when they're doing the Paintersville, but I've been around when PG&E redid some of their stuff downtown, and I worked at the animal shelter. We had to drug animals to get them through the day and night when that was going on. And that was something that was not even a fraction of the size of what's being proposed. The other thing that it's still really bothering me and a lot of people in Hood that we're still being excluded from things. I mean, in 4C, we're talking about mitigating noise for Clarksburg and Elk Grove, but you literally have us surrounded to the north and south by intakes where this pile driving is going to be taking place. Somebody brought up earlier concerns about our levee being one of the weakest points in the whole system, which is true. How is putting these massive intakes on that spot going to work? Are we going to be completely flooded? We had a massive flood. It was before I was born. It was in the 70s. And I'd hate to see that happen again, especially since the houses are now 40, almost 50 years older than they were back then. The other thing is with the pile driving, how is that going to affect the homes in Hood seismically? These are homes that were World War II era houses. There are not very many new ones. How's that going to affect them? And talking about the Hull Road, I still haven't seen anything really addressed about what they're going to do with the SMUD electrical facility that's right there. The homes that they're taking out. There was talk about redoing the bridge that's right there. How is that going to affect coming in and out of town? There was mention of, I believe Emily was talking about the roads in and out of the Delta. There's really only a handful of them. And if they're being blocked, especially since Hood is being surrounded by construction, how are we going to get in and out of town when there's an emergency or just even to do our day-to-day living? And I think that these things our town has been severely neglected in this conversation. I keep hearing about somebody's supposed to be representing us. They haven't. And I feel like because we're a town of mostly elderly and minority people of color, that we've been overlooked in this conversation where other communities of more affluence have been paid attention to. And that's not fair.
Okay, thank you so much, Gia. We appreciate your comments. Stephen Rosenblum. Stephen, are you speaking on item 4, or were you talking about, did you want to address non-agendized items? Stephen? Is Stephen Rosenblum on? No, Stephen Rosenblum. All right. Well, I'm not hearing him. And so what we can do is bring it up again in non-agendized items if that's a deal. Deirdre Dehardine, I see that your hand is up. We had a 4 o'clock cutoff for submitting sheets submitting online comment cards. So normally we would say, hey, this is one of those moments where you can go ahead and submit your comments in writing. However, we're going to be a little flexible this time, but next time I just need to emphasize that we really need to get the comment cards, the virtual comment cards and the digital comment cards so that we can make sure that we're being fair to everyone. So Deirdre, go ahead. You have 3 minutes. Deirdre? You're muted.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Am I unmuted? Okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out,
it looks like your Byron Tract or Bethany Reservoir option goes under the ranch house on Suzanne Womack's property. And you might want to double check the assertion that it doesn't go under any buildings.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right,
Okay.
Sarah.
All right, so I will finish those. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, Nasli, this is item 5A. Nasli, provide an update on the SEC tours.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience on the tours. Jasmine, if you mind, just bring up the website. I just want to let you know that the tours are up, the virtual tours. Jasmine's pulling up our website just so you can see when you click on the August SEC materials. Jazz, do you mind going back one just so folks can see where it is? There you go. So go to our homepage, click on our August 26th meeting, and then scroll down towards the bottom. And you'll see the tours there. Jazz, if you don't mind just kind of clicking on one, but you don't have to play it out loud. The videos are up on YouTube to make it easier to download. We split them into a couple parts because it'll just be take shorter download time. So there'll be an overall project overview for those who don't really know about the project. Get that ad off my computer, Jess. And then there we have the northern facilities and the southern facilities. Those stay the same, regardless of eastern or central alignment, as well as, and then you can take a tour of the eastern or the central. We have not put up a Bethany one yet, obviously, because the work is really preliminary. If it makes sense at some point to add a Bethany alternative virtual tour, we will of course do that once there's more information. But just wanted to let you know that it's up. Thank you for your patience. As you know, there were a lot of changes being made. And so updating a project like this just takes a few weeks, but there you go. And the intent is also that you can use this along with your map books to actually go on a tour yourself. We can't do it as a group for safety reasons, but you can also just play this as audio and use your maps and sort of take a drive around. Obviously, please be careful. We'll put all the warnings out there. But what this should do, and the format of it should do, is give you an overall picture and then be able to zoom in on properties that are being considered or areas that are being considered for facilities, and give you information on what the facility is, what it's being used for, construction area, and overall area. All right. So let us know if there's any feedback you have. It's always appreciated if something doesn't make sense or doesn't work, or, we'll take positive feedback too, but please let me know. Thank you.
And again, Nasli, these are all properties that are under consideration. This is not a final, no decisions have been made,
yep.
Correct?
Make it very clear in the beginning, but it's always worth saying. So thank you, Val. This is similar to your map books. These are for illustrative purposes only. Nothing's been determined. This is the information that we gave to Carrie. Final decision will be made by DWR at the end of the CEQA process, okay? So I know folks have been asking about eminent domain and things like that. We're just not there. I'm not gonna say, because you've heard all the conversations, it's not a random drop on the map, but there's still flexibility there, and the engineers have done their best to try to be responsive to moving facilities and whatnot, but it's still not fully our decision, okay?
Great. Thank you, Nasli. That was very good, and that's a lot of work you put into that. Okay, and now Catherine on the 5B. Catherine's going to go over some of the proposed meeting topics for our September meeting. Take it away.
Well, it'll be quick. There's really what we want to do is advance the Bethany alternative at the next meeting, and we're hoping by then we'll have evaluated the land between the lower Roberts lawn shaft up to the reservoir in the same red, yellow, green way that we did before, and go through our siting alternatives analysis and our preferred site selections. And we'll try to do that both for the shafts and pump station, as well as the pipeline routes up the hill toward the reservoir. So that's
Awesome.
really what we would like to cover at the next meeting.
Okay.
Awesome. Anna, do you have a clarifying question?
I do. Sorry, back on the tours. One, Nasli, will you send that out to us? And then two, it's very important that people remember that this is private land. And if you see a no trespassing sign or it appears to be someone's private property, please don't trespass on their property. It's really, really important that we honor and value and remember that these are people who live out here. These are farmers. These are residents. These are communities. And so I don't want anyone to take that virtual tour as a permission slip to just willy-nilly, cruise out wherever they feel like they want to. It doesn't really work that way out here or anywhere.
Yeah, Anna, I'm so grateful for you pointing that out. When we sort of gave the reasons as to why we were going to do the virtual tours versus in-person tour, obviously getting everybody on a bus was problematic. But when we drove around, again, it was dangerous to pull over. A lot of areas are private. And thank you so much for bringing that up again. You are free to sort of do the drive. I'm going to say this again and amplify what Anna said. Do not go onto private property. There's property that has been marked on Google as public, but we found out was bought, by a farmer and is now private. Those things are, again, Google Maps don't get updated. So we really did do the virtual tours as a means of giving everyone a very good sense of the area. Again, if you want to go for a drive, by all means, but from what I found when I did a tour, it's really hard to access most of the sites. There's trees in front of you, it's private property, whatnot. So do it with the utmost caution, do it with the utmost respect for the community, and mostly be safe. So thanks, Anna. And yes, I will send out the links to everyone on the SEC.
Thank you, Nasli.
Don't go anywhere, Nasli. We still need you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Were there any other comments to Nasli from the SEC?
I think we're good. No.
Okay, good, good. So now Catherine's going to go over she did the proposed meeting topics, and now we have to identify those members of the SEC who will be the representatives to the DCA board meeting during the September 17th meeting, and I'm hoping to see some of you there.
Yes, the usual voluntold. We didn't have anyone do it last month, and it's a total volunteer activity, but if there's anyone who would like to report out in September, that would be great. Last week, what Catherine ended up doing was actually going through SEC feedback and how it has kind of what we do at the meetings now every month here, but sort of gave the DCA board a good idea of how SEC feedback has affected the sightings and whatnot throughout our work. But the board would love to hear from you. The board president and whatnot, the leadership has shifted around a little bit. So might be, again, a nice time for the SEC to kind of meet the new leadership and for them to meet you.
Yeah, the board really does like to hear from you, and it is televised, so be aware of that. And because the board, obviously coming from various portions of the state, it's truly important that you make your voices heard.
Yep. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but feel free to email me if you are interested. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right. So I believe now we're on for item 5, public comment. Are there any public comments for any of the items on number 5?
We have none.
Okay, then let's move on to the non-agendized SEC questions or comments. And this is the time for the SEC members to provide information about outreach or questions raised related to the proposed project and any other items you feel you haven't been able to bring up during this meeting. And that means if there's something you did not bring up in the forum and you want to bring it up here, then this is the time to do it. Please don't just repeat what you've already said in the forum, but move on to something new. Okay.
And this has been a unique meeting in that we spent well over an hour having this kind of conversation. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're good. I'm not seeing any hands. Why don't we go ahead and move on to item 7?
Okay, item 7 is public comment and is noted on the agenda and discussed beforehand. We'll now do public comment on the non-agendized items. Ms. Martinez, any public comments on this?
We do. Let's see. I'm going to again name names, and so that everyone can kind of be ready when we call you.
Do you have any idea of how many we have?
Yes, we have 7. So
Okay,
yes. We and Emily actually I think already spoke on item 4, but we'll go ahead and ask her in just a moment. Emily Papalardo. We have Jocelyn Albert, John McManus. We have someone named Connor, Brandon Dawson, Heinrich Albert, and Charming Evelyn. Well, I want that name. That's a great name. And then, again, Stephen Rosenblum wasn't available, I guess, or on the call when we called him last time. So you can kind of roll in on the back end. Emily, did you pretty much handle your comment last time, or did you have more to say?
I did. 3 minutes does go by fast, but I think I got it all out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. All right, Jocelyn Albert, or is
Hi.
that Jacqueline?
It's Jacqueline. Yeah. Thank you. This is my first meeting, so I just want to say thank you for opening it up. I learned a lot. I was really impressed by some impassioned SEC members, and I'm just going to continue to echo that and urge that an alternative, no-tone alternative is considered in an EIR. Alternatives of water preservation and different means are considered instead of an only tunnel option in EIR. That is my public comment. That's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And honestly, thank you for being brief because you hit it and you got out. I appreciate that.
I didn't have anything new to say. Everyone said exactly what
Thank you. Well, no, trust me, we appreciate that. And it's actually really impactful when someone does that. John McManus.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm John McManus. I'm the president of the Golden State Salmon Association. We are a group that represents both sport and commercial salmon fishermen and related businesses and industries. It's been really interesting listening to this conversation today. And it's clear that many of the people that have spoke have great reservations with this project that is barreling forward. I've heard from your group that it's not your purview to say yay or nay to the project, but just what size and shape it ought to be. But I would encourage you to use the voice that you have to encourage DWR to do something smarter here. The State Water Quality Control Board hasn't even finished its water quality control standards update. We don't know how much water there is for export. How in the world can a right-sized project be planned at this point when the State Board hasn't finished its work? And I would agree with the call of those who say that you should demand of DWR to come back with a project proposal that is a no project, no tunnel, however, does include new things that can be done to strengthen levees in the Delta to protect it from the sea level rise that we agree is going to happen, while also developing new water sources for the people in California. Our main concern is the health of the salmon fishery, and it's declined greatly over the last 100 years. And with this project going forward, it seems pretty clear there's going to be more damage. So with a minute and a half left, I'll cede my time.
Thank you so much, John. We appreciate your comments. Connor, are you on?
Yes, I am.
All right, go ahead.
Connor Everts from the Southern California Watershed Alliance and facilitator for the Environmental Water Caucus. Like others, this isn't my first go around on some iteration of conveyance, but I think it's important to say that what we've heard in the integrated resource planning, the Metropolitan Water District, is that their lowest water sales in 40 years was last year, and they expect this year to be lower, and that they have more water in storage than they ever have in history. So the idea that you need to build this project because of the greater demand in Southern California, we have found is not true, and it continues not to be. We are working hard on what are called the alternatives, but are really untapped local water resources, and we continue to do that. That is what we do in the alternative, but it should be considered first as the no project alternative. I appreciate the boxes you all are in, but I'm trying to rethink how you say putting the cart in front of the horse, putting the tunnel in front of the delta. I appreciate the comments made by both Barbara and Jim Wallace, but I think the discussion should include people that will be impacted and the economic impacts of COVID, and trying to have these discussions in the midst of what are going to be at least 6 to 7 months of unpaid water bills for the environmental justice community that we work with should be a first consideration instead of moving ahead with the engineering. So I guess the elephant is sucking out of your watering hole, but it's stomping around on the impacts of the health and safety and the human right to water in Southern California. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Connor. Thank you for joining us. Brandon Dawson.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, we can.
Perfect. Good evening, Stakeholder Engagement Committee members. My name is Brandon Dawson. I'm a policy advocate for Sierra Club, California. As last month's meeting, the Department of Water Resources presented you all alternatives that it was considering to include in the tunnel's environmental impact report. And in that presentation, they informed you that they wouldn't be considering a no tunnel alternative. This committee was formed to give the state much needed advice as to how it could avoid, reduce, or mitigate significant environmental and cultural impacts that the tunnel will have. And there's no better way to avoid those impacts than by not building the tunnel at all and actually investing in local projects that have the dual benefit of providing resilient water supplies for the respective regions, while also protecting the ecological, environmental, cultural, and economical value of the Delta. So we urge you, as Sierra Club, California, to request that the department consider a no tunnel alternative, or what we at Sierra Club, California consider a common sense alternative, because it makes more sense to put these projects first than going to the last needed project, which would be the tunnel. This common sense alternative would consist of no construction of the tunnel and promote shifting those resources to other locally dependent projects. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for joining us, Heinrich Alpert. Go ahead, Heinrich. Do we have Heinrich? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's
him.
I'm sorry?
I don't see him.
Yeah, I don't either. Okay. So Heinrich, if you end up coming in, we'll go ahead and add you after. Charming Evelyn.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. I love your name. Go ahead, Charming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank my parents. My name is Charming Evelyn, and I am also with Sierra Club. I chair the Water Committee for the Angeles chapter, which represents LA and Orange County. And I'm also the vice chair of the Environmental Justice Committee. And so today, I wanted really to talk about rates and the fact that Southern California is moving towards water independence, and no one is thinking how much is all of these projects going to cost the ratepayer. You have delta tunnels, you have stormwater capture, Measure W, you have ocean desalination happening, you have lots of recycling plants being built, being expanded. All of this takes money away from the ratepayer, and everything is in the million dollar range. And this absolutely has to be considered, especially with COVID and even before that. And every project tells you it's only going to be the price of a latte. Guess what? A lot of people cannot afford a latte every week or every day. So this really is a huge problem that needs to be considered, and especially for renters, because the law in California is that any proposition, Measure W, that a landowner is paying is passed on to the renter. And it's not passed on to the renter by $5 or $6. It's normally by $50 or $100. And these things really have to be taken into consideration. I really do ask you to please keep that in mind and ask for a no tunnel alternative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, so we're not seeing Stephen Rosenblum in the group. Stephen, if you're there, please chime in. Same thing with Heinrich Alpert. We're not seeing him in the group. So we're going to go ahead and move on. That's the total number of people who actually are providing oral public comment. I will also note that we are getting some written comments received. And just for the record, because I want to call out the fact that we do have some folks who are just providing comment in writing rather than speaking. William Martin, Jorge de Checo, Janet Wall, Robert Venning, Rosalie Preston, and Jean Severinghouse have provided written comment. Thank you again for participating. We appreciate your involvement and your engagement on this issue.
Yes, and your written comment will become part of our records. So I just want to remind everybody that our next meeting is up next September 23rd, I believe it is. Again, 3 to 6. We're going to try 4. And other than that, I want to thank you all. Please take care with all of these fires and everything. I hope people have not lost property. I know this has happened to a couple of friends of mine out here in this region, and I have some friends who are out there on their ranches right now building more fire breaks, and some of you may be involved in that kind of thing too. So please be careful. Be careful of the air you're breathing. And other than that,
Sarah, we have 2 hands up. Can we just take those 2 quick
sure, go right ahead and
all right.
We'll adjourn.
we're at that end point, but we're at 6:11. Anna and Sean, go ahead, Anna, and then we'll have Sean speak.
I just wanted to know where we would be able to find the written public comment. Will that be included with the minutes, or where will we be able to find that written public comment?
It'll be part of the minutes.
Yes, as it always is.
Sure.
What's our next one?
And Sean. Oh, I'm sorry, Sean Worth.
I just wanted to quickly say that a lot of the public comments echo the general frustration in the environmental community right now over not having the no tunnel alternative, a robust no tunnel alternative. And a lot of it stems from the fact that it would make a lot more sense to take a look at what's best for California as opposed to what's best for the Central Valley project. And I would like the SEC to let the DCA know that we would like a very robust no tunnel alternative where we take a look at the actual need for this project and have that as part of the public face of this effort in terms of full disclosure. Can we get away with not having this, both in terms of the expense and with the environmental damage? Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very much. That was well taken. Okay, so again, our next meeting is September 23rd. And again, be very safe. Use if you can, please use your air purifiers if you have them. I realize so many people don't. So we're all living with this. So thank you so much, and we are adjourned.
Thank you.
If anybody cares, the air is perfect in Humboldt County right now. Absolutely no smoke. All
We're
ocean.
on our way. Thank you.
You're lucky.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all.
Bye. You too.